She grabbed a complete stranger's hand, slammed it down on her knee, leaned into his shoulder, and whispered 4 words that stopped his heart cold. "You're my husband. Now." He hadn't touched a woman's hand in 3 years. Not since the hospital. Not since the funeral. Not since the night his whole world went silent. And yet here he was, a Navy man, a widower, a single father of a 7-year-old girl, suddenly married to a woman whose name he didn't even know. What happened next on that train would change both of their lives forever. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if this is your first time here, hit subscribe. You're going to want to stay for all 5 parts. Caleb Harrison had a system. He woke up at 5:47 every morning, 13 minutes before the alarm, because his body had been trained by the Navy to anticipate. He made coffee. He packed a lunch. He ironed a small purple shirt that belonged to a 7-year-old girl named Lily, who would sleep through every single alarm he set and still somehow make it to school on time because he carried her to the car in her pajamas and let her change in the back seat. That was the system. That was the life. It wasn't a bad life. People told him that all the time. "You're doing so well, Caleb. She's lucky to have you. You're such a strong man." He never told them the truth. That some nights after Lily was asleep and the house went quiet, he sat at the kitchen table and stared at a coffee mug that still had his late wife's lipstick on the rim because he hadn't been able to bring himself to wash it. That wasn't strength. That was a man who had forgotten how to move forward and was too exhausted to explain why. The Thursday he boarded the 9:15 Amtrak out of Baltimore wasn't supposed to be anything. A routine shift transfer. A colleague covering for him in D.C. while he handled a certification-recertification at a training facility 3 hours south. He'd done the trip before, knew which car had the best seats, knew to bring his own coffee because the cafe car was always out of dark roast by 10. He found his seat by the window, second car from the back left side, so the morning sun didn't hit his eyes, and he settled in the way a man settles in when he's learned that the only reliable piece in his day happens during transit. Headphones in, eyes forward, invisible. He was good at invisible. The Navy had taught him how to disappear inside a crowd, how to read a room without being read, how to sit still while everything moved around him. He watched the platform through the glass as the last passengers boarded. A woman with too many bags argued with a conductor. 2 college kids laughed too loud near the doors. An older man in a veteran's cap walked slowly, carefully, like each step was a negotiation with gravity. Caleb felt something warm and quiet looking at that man. "Keep going, brother." The doors closed. The train began to move. He exhaled. 3 hours of nothing. 3 hours of just existing without having to be anyone's father, anyone's coworker, anyone's strong friend. He reached up and touched the silver bracelet on his left wrist. Not his watch. The bracelet thin and simple with a small clasp that his wife Maya had bought at a craft fair in Annapolis the summer before she got sick. She'd bought 2. One for her, one for him. She'd said it was silly, a couple's bracelet, and laughed about it the whole drive home. He'd told her it was absolutely ridiculous and worn it every single day since. He touched it now the way he always did. A reflex. A small private prayer that nobody saw. He closed his eyes. He heard her before he saw her. Not loud. The opposite of loud. It was the quality of silence around her that pulled his attention, the specific hush of someone trying very hard not to make a sound while something was very wrong. He opened his eyes. A woman was moving through the car. Mid-30s maybe. Brown hair pulled back a few strands loose. A green dress that looked like it was meant for something important, a wedding maybe, or a formal dinner. She had a small bag over one shoulder, and she was holding the strap so tight her knuckles were white. She wasn't looking at the seats. She was looking back over her shoulder. Caleb tracked her gaze automatically. Old habit eyes following threat lines before the brain catches up, and he saw him immediately. Far end of the car, standing near the connector door. Tall, good-looking in a polished, deliberate way. Dark blazer. The kind of man who knew exactly how he appeared to other people and had spent years perfecting the performance. He was watching the woman. Not the way a man watches someone he loves. The way a man watches something he believes he owns. Caleb had seen that look before. Not on civilians. On certain commanders in certain closed-door rooms during certain conversations where rank was being used as a weapon. The look that said, "I don't need to chase you. You'll come back to me eventually, and we both know it." The woman reached Caleb's row. She stopped. She looked at the empty seat beside him. Then she looked back over her shoulder again. The man at the end of the car hadn't moved. He didn't need to. The distance itself was the pressure. She turned back to Caleb, and she sat down. Not casually. Not the way someone sits next to a stranger on a train with a polite nod and immediate mutual agreement to pretend the other person doesn't exist. She sat down like the seat was a life raft. She put her bag in her lap. She stared straight ahead. 5 seconds of silence. 10 seconds. And then, without turning her head, in a voice barely above a breath, she said, "Please don't pull away. I know this is insane. I know you don't know me. But there is a man at the back of this car who won't leave me alone, and I need you to pretend to be my husband for the next 3 hours." Caleb didn't move. He didn't speak. He did what years of training had built into him. He assessed. She wasn't performing. There was no manipulation in her voice, no calculation, no practiced angle. What he heard was the specific, unvarnished sound of genuine fear being held together by a woman who refused to let it show on her face. He glanced toward the back of the car again. The man was still there, still watching. And now, slowly, deliberately, he was beginning to walk forward. Caleb looked down at his own hands. The bracelet on his wrist. The empty seat across from him that nobody was sitting in. He'd spent 3 years protecting his daughter. He'd spent a whole career protecting strangers. He thought about all the times he'd run toward a situation that every reasonable instinct said to run away from. He thought about Maya, who used to say, "Caleb, you don't know how to walk past something that needs fixing. It's the worst and best thing about you." He exhaled once. Then he turned to the woman beside him. And he said calmly, quietly, with the full weight of a man who had made decisions under fire, "What's your name?" She blinked, like she hadn't expected that to be his first question. "Sophie," she whispered. "Sophie." He nodded once. "I'm Caleb. How long have we been married?" Her breath caught. For just a second, one single cracked second, something moved through her eyes that wasn't fear. 4 years, she said. Her voice was still shaking, but something else was underneath it now. Something that was trying to hold itself together. "We met in Annapolis." He reached over, slowly, deliberately, in full view of anyone watching. And he took her hand. Her fingers were cold. She was trembling slightly, the way a person trembles when they've been holding tension in their body for a very long time and haven't admitted it yet. He didn't squeeze her hand like a man claiming something. He held it like someone who knew what it meant to need an anchor. "Annapolis." He repeated, his voice easy, conversational for anyone who might be listening. "You always leave out the part where you spilled coffee on me." She stared at him. He kept his eyes forward, but the corner of his mouth moved. "If we've been married 4 years, we need details. Details make it real." A pause. "You spilled coffee on me," she said, slowly, catching up. "At the harbor. You were texting and not watching where you were going. You didn't say anything. You just handed me a napkin. It was your napkin. You'd already grabbed it from the counter. And there it was. The smallest, most fragile thing." Sophie laughed. It was brief, barely a sound. Really more like a gasp that changed direction halfway through, and she caught herself immediately pressing her lips together. But it had happened, and Caleb felt something shift in his chest. Something that had been locked still for a very long time. He glanced back toward the rear of the car. The man, Ryan, he'd learned the name later, had stopped walking. He was watching them. His jaw was tight. His eyes moved between Sophie and Caleb with the careful, recalibrating look of a man whose strategy had just encountered unexpected resistance. He didn't come closer. Not yet. But he didn't leave. Caleb turned back to the window. His hand stayed where it was holding Sophie's, steady and unhurried. "Tell me something real," he said quietly. "Not about the fake story. About why you're on this train." She was silent for a long moment. Then, "My brother's getting married this weekend. The ceremony Saturday. Ryan. She stopped, started again. The man in the back, he was my fiancé, until 8 months ago. What happened? I found out who he actually was. Caleb didn't ask her to elaborate. He knew there were certain sentences that contained entire years inside them, and pushing at them too quickly only closed doors. And he's going to the wedding. He's friends with my brother's future in-laws. He's been there for a month, staying with them, pretending. Her voice dipped. Pretending that he's the one who was hurt, that I was unstable, that I ended everything for no reason. And your brother believes that. My brother loves me. But Ryan is. She exhaled through her nose. Ryan is very good at being believed. Caleb was quiet for a moment. He watched a farmhouse pass outside the glass. A red truck on a county road. A dog running along a fence line chasing nothing. You're not the villain, he said finally, just because someone else got to tell the story first. Sophie turned and looked at him, really looked at him. Not the assessing glance of a woman trying to figure out if she'd made a dangerous mistake, but something slower, more careful. You sound like someone who knows that from experience, she said. He didn't answer right away. He touched the bracelet on his wrist without thinking about it. My wife died 3 years ago, he said. Cancer. She was 32. A beat of silence. After she passed, he continued his voice level, measured the voice of someone who'd had to tell the story enough times that he'd learned to say it without breaking. People had a lot of versions of who I was. The strong one, the stoic Navy guy who was handling everything, the good dad. He paused. Nobody asked if I was drowning. Sophie's hand, which had been still in his, shifted slightly, not pulling away, just present. Were you? She asked. Every day, he said simply. Something about that honesty seemed to reach her in a way that comfort wouldn't have. She looked back at the window. I have a daughter, he said, because he didn't know why, but it felt like something she should know. Lily, she's She still leaves her shoes in the exact wrong place every single day, and I've stopped correcting it because watching her do it is. He stopped. Something moved in his throat. It's the best part of my morning. Sophie smiled. Not a performance. Not the polite, contained smile of a woman navigating a difficult situation. A real smile. What's she like? She's brave, he said immediately. She'll walk up to anyone, ask any question. She doesn't understand yet that the world might teach her to stop doing that. I'm trying to preserve it as long as I can. She sounds like she has a good father. She has a father who tries, he said. Which is the most honest thing I can say. 3 rows back. Ryan Whitmore was still watching them. Caleb could feel it the way he'd been trained to feel surveillance, a pressure between the shoulder blades, a slight wrongness in the air. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Because the most powerful thing he could do right now had nothing to do with Ryan. It was this sitting beside a woman who needed to feel like she wasn't alone, holding her hand like it was the most natural thing in the world, building a story between them, word by word. The coffee, Sophie said suddenly. At the harbor. What were you doing there? He looked at her. I was buying a bracelet at a craft fair, he said. She looked at the bracelet on his wrist. He saw understanding move through her eyes, not the fake marriage detail, but the real one underneath it. I'm sorry, she said softly. Don't be, he said. I was buying it for her. She was standing right next to me, arguing about the price, because she thought $15 was unreasonable for something that small. The corner of his mouth moved again. She was right. I paid anyway. Sophie's fingers tightened slightly around his. Not romantic, not strategic, just human. Why did you say yes? She asked. When I sat down. You didn't know me. You didn't know if I was dangerous. He glanced at her. You weren't. People who are dangerous don't apologize while they're asking for help. I didn't apologize. You said, I know this is insane, and I know you don't know me. That's an apology wearing different clothes. She looked at him for a long moment. You're very strange, she said. Former Navy, he said like that explained everything. Does that come with a personality guidebook? It comes with the ability to stay calm when someone grabs your hand on a moving train and tells you you're married. Is that a course they offer? Advanced unit. Not everyone passes. She laughed again. Longer this time. Quieter than it should have been, careful not to draw attention, but real, the kind of laugh that climbs up from somewhere, it's been stored for a while, and isn't entirely sure it's allowed out. Caleb felt that locked thing in his chest again. Not pain, not grief, something else. Something that felt faintly and terrifyingly like waking up. Ryan moved again. Caleb caught the motion in his peripheral vision, a slow, deliberate walk up the center aisle, hands in his pockets. The practiced casualness of a man who wanted to appear like he wasn't doing exactly what he was doing. He stopped at their row. Sophie. His voice was warm. That was the first thing Caleb noticed. Deliberately, expertly warm, the voice of a man who had practiced being the reasonable one. Sophie went rigid. Her hand tightened in Caleb's. She didn't look up. Ryan's eyes moved to Caleb. A quick evaluating scan, the kind of look men give each other when they're determining hierarchy. Sorry to interrupt, Ryan said with a smile that said he wasn't. Sophie, I just wanted to say hi. It's been a while. It has, she said. Her voice was controlled. Barely. Ryan's eyes stayed on Caleb. I don't think we've met. Caleb looked at him. Not aggressively, not carefully. The way you look at something that doesn't require much of you. Caleb, he said. And you're? Her husband, Caleb said. Simply. Like a fact. Like weather. A flicker in Ryan's eyes. Recalibration. I didn't know Sophie had gotten married, Ryan said, and there was something underneath the warmth now, something thin and sharp. We kept it small, Caleb said. Family only. You know how it is. Ryan looked at Sophie. I didn't even hear about an engagement. Sophie finally looked up at him. And something had changed in her face, because Caleb was beside her, because she wasn't alone in this moment. Something had steadied. There are a lot of things about my life you don't hear about anymore, Ryan, she said. A pause. Ryan's smile stayed exactly where it was, which Caleb knew was the tell. Real smiles don't hold position under pressure. Well, Ryan said, finally looking between them. It was good to see you, Sophie. Enjoy the ride. He walked back down the aisle. Sophie let out a breath that she'd been holding Caleb suspected for the last 2 minutes. He's not done, Caleb said quietly. No, she agreed. He never is. Tell me about your brother. She looked at him sideways. Because, he said, if I'm going to walk into a wedding with you on Saturday, I should probably know his name. She stared at him. Caleb, you don't have to. Sophie. He turned and looked at her directly, for the first time, really looked at her the way he'd been trained to look at a situation when the stakes had just changed. I have a 3-hour train ride with nowhere to be and nothing to do. You have a weekend that's going to be hard, even on the best day, and a man on this train who's been told by the world that he still has power over your life. He paused. What's your brother's name? A long silence. Daniel, she said. How old? 28. Is he happy? The question seemed to catch her off guard. Yes, she said softly. He really is. Then he deserves a weekend where nobody has to spend energy protecting him from conflict. She watched him. You're very strange, she said again. You mentioned that. It bears repeating. He almost smiled. Outside, the landscape was opening up, the compressed edges of city, giving way to something wider, greener, unhurried. The train moved through it steadily, carrying all these separate lives in their separate silences. Caleb looked out the window. He thought about Lily. I thought about the drive home from the cemetery 3 years ago, when he'd sat in the car for 40 minutes before he could make himself walk into the house, because he knew once he walked in without Maya, the house would be officially, permanently different. He thought about all the mornings since, all the lunches packed, all the bedtime stories, all the quiet private moments at the kitchen table with a coffee mug he still hadn't washed. He thought about how much of himself he'd put into storage, how he'd told himself it was for Lily, How he was only now admitting, sitting beside a stranger on a moving train with her cold hand in his, that the storage had started to feel permanent. Sophie's voice broke through. "Can I ask you something?" "Yeah. Why does a former Navy rescue specialist spend his days now doing civilian emergency work instead of, I don't know, running a maritime company, or teaching, or doing something that pays better?" He turned to look at her. "How do you know what I do?" She pointed at his jacket, the small EMT certification patch on the sleeve he always forgot was visible. "Oh." He looked down at it. "Because someone has to." That's the whole answer. That's the real answer. She studied him for a moment. "You're one of those people," she said. "What kind?" "The kind who runs toward things." He considered that. "I used to think that was just what I did," he said. "Now I think—" He stopped. "Now I think it might have been easier than standing still." She was quiet. Then, "I know what that feels like." And in that sentence, 4 words, no drama, no performance. Caleb understood that this woman beside him had been running too. Not from danger. From the space that opens up when a life you planned stops being possible. He'd been running too. The uniform, the system, the packed lunches and ironed shirts. All of it, if he was honest, was motion that kept him from having to stop. The train moved south. Ryan sat somewhere behind them watching, and Caleb Harrison, former Navy widower, single father man, who had not allowed himself to want tomorrow for 3 long years, sat beside a stranger named Sophie Bennett, and felt for the first time in longer than he could name, that this particular today was not something he wanted to end. Outside the window, the last of the city disappeared. 3 hours remained. Neither of them was counting. Ryan didn't come back right away. That was the thing about men like him. Caleb had figured out inside the first 60 seconds they didn't charge. They circled. They waited. They let the pressure build on its own, because they'd learned that most people given enough time would collapse under the weight of their own anxiety without him having to do anything at all. Caleb had known commanders like that. Men who understood that power wasn't about the strike, it was about the sustained suggestion of one. "I wasn't going to let that work here." "Tell me more about Daniel," he said. "The brother. What does he do?" Sophie blinked like she was surprised the conversation was still moving forward. Like part of her had expected Caleb to declare the performance over stand-up return to his window and his headphones and his invisible life. "He's a high school soccer coach," she said. "In Charlottesville. He's been with Elena for 4 years. She's the one he's marrying. She teaches 2nd grade. A pause. Something warm moved into Sophie's voice. "She's the best thing that ever happened to him. She's the kind of person who sends birthday cards to her students' parents, who remembers that your coffee is oat milk without asking twice. And Daniel, what's he like?" "He's—" She stopped, thought about it. "He still thinks the best of people, even after everything, even after watching what Ryan did to me and my family. He still defaults to believing that people are mostly good." Another pause. "I used to think that was naive. Now I think it's the bravest thing a person can be." "He sounds like your daughter," Caleb said without thinking. Sophie looked at him. "Lily," he said, "I told you she'll walk up to anyone, ask any question. She doesn't know yet to be afraid of being wrong about people." "You said you're trying to protect that in her." "Yeah. And you think it's brave." "I think it's the thing the world works hardest to take away from you." Sophie was quiet for a moment, watching him with that careful measuring look. She had the look of someone who'd learned not to trust quickly and was doing the slow, deliberate math of deciding whether this was the exception. "What was she like?" she asked. "Your wife." The question landed softly. No apology around it, no nervous qualifier. She asked it the way you ask about someone's favorite book. Like Maya was allowed to be spoken about. Like she wasn't a wound that required gloves. Caleb appreciated that more than he could explain. "Her name was Maya," he said. "She was a physical therapist. She worked with kids, mostly kids with mobility issues, post-surgery rehab, that kind of thing." He looked out the window for a moment. "She had this way of walking into a room, like she'd already decided it was going to go well. Not arrogance, just conviction. She believed good things were coming, and somehow the room caught up with her. How long were you married? 6 years before she was diagnosed. 8 total. And Lily was 4 when Maya passed. She's 7 now. He exhaled quietly. She doesn't remember everything, but she remembers the important things. She remembers that her mom laughed loud. She told me that last year. She said, "Daddy, I remember Mama laughed like she meant it." I didn't know what to do with that. I went and cried in the bathroom for 10 minutes. Sophie didn't say I'm sorry. She didn't say that's beautiful, or she sounds wonderful. She said, "Did you cry loud or quiet?" He looked at her. Because, Sophie said, "I think there's a difference. Quiet crying is the kind you've practiced. Loud crying is the kind that surprises you." A beat. "Quiet," he said. She nodded slowly. "You've been doing this a long time." Grieving. Holding it. He didn't answer that, because she was right, and he didn't have a version of denying it that didn't sound hollow. He looked down at his hands. Both of them now, his left with the bracelet, his right resting on his knee, and he thought about how long it had been since someone had said a true thing to him without flinching from it. People in his life were kind. His co-workers, his neighbors, his sister who called every Sunday. All kind. All careful. Nobody was careless with him in the good way. The way Maya had been careless in the way that meant she didn't treat him like something fragile. In the way that meant she'd call him out and love him simultaneously without making him choose between being known and being held. He hadn't realized how much he missed being known until this moment on a train with a woman whose last name he'd only just learned. "Bennett," he said. Sophie tilted her head. "What? Your last name, Sophie Bennett. I figured I should know it, for the cover story." "Right." She almost smiled. "And yours?" "Harrison, Caleb James Harrison." "So I'm Sophie Harrison. Unless you kept your name." "Did we talk about that?" "We probably argued about it." "Who won?" "You kept your name professionally, changed it legally. We compromised." She looked at him with something that wasn't quite amusement, and wasn't quite something else it was in the space between, in the territory that doesn't have a clean word for it. "You're good at this," she said. "At what? Building something out of nothing." He considered that. "I spent a lot of years planning for scenarios that didn't exist yet. You learn to make the details real before the situation demands them. Otherwise you hesitate, and hesitation costs." "That's very military. It's also very parenting." She laughed at that, a real one, not careful, a little surprised at itself. "Do you have siblings?" she asked. "One. My sister Rachel. She's in Annapolis, which is actually true, not just the cover story, which is convenient." "Does she know about Lily Help Out?" "She's the reason I'm functional," he said plainly. "She took 3 months off work after Maya died, slept on our couch, reorganized the kitchen so I could find things without thinking. She created a system for Lily's school forms and doctor appointments that I still use." He paused. "I don't know how to thank someone for that. I've tried. She tells me to stop." "That's what real family does." "Yeah." He looked at her. "What about your parents? Are they going to be at the wedding?" And here, right here, he felt it. The thing he'd learned to watch for in rescue work and crisis intervention, in any situation where what someone showed on their face and what was happening underneath had stopped matching up. Sophie's expression didn't fall apart. She was too controlled for that. But something in her eyes went very still. "My mom is," she said. "Dad passed 5 years ago. Heart attack." "I'm sorry." He would have liked this story, she said, and there was something wry and painful in it simultaneously. He was a big fan of unexpected things. He used to say the best moments in life were the ones you couldn't have planned. Smart man. He was. A breath. He also would have had Ryan figured out within 30 seconds of meeting him. He had a gift for it, seeing through the performance. I used to think I inherited it. Something flickered. Apparently not. "You ended the engagement," Caleb said. "Eventually. You saw through it eventually. That's not failure, that's just time. 8 months is a long time to not see what's in front of you." "How long were you together?" 2 years. Did he hurt you? Caleb asked. He kept his voice neutral. No heat in it, no leading pressure, just the question, clean and direct. Sophie was quiet for several seconds. Not the way you're asking, she said finally. It wasn't physical. It was... She stopped, started again. It was quieter than that. It was the way he'd correct things I said in front of other people, and make it sound like he was helping. The way he'd tell a story about something we'd done together, and it would be slightly different every time, and I'd be slightly smaller in it every time, and when I pointed that out, he'd look so confused and hurt that I'd end up apologizing. She exhaled. It was the way I started editing myself before I spoke. Started running things through, will this embarrass him? Will this make him pull away for 3 days and then act like I imagined it? Another pause. I stopped knowing what I actually thought about things, what I actually liked, because my opinion had become so tangled up with his reaction to it. Caleb listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't fill the spaces with comfort. He let her say it. Because the truth was, he knew what it felt like when something erased you slowly. He knew what it felt like to lose yourself not in one sudden moment, but in a long series of small adjustments, each of which seemed reasonable in isolation. His had been grief. Hers had been Ryan. The mechanism was different. The result was the same. When did you know? He asked. The moment you actually knew it was over. She thought about that. There was a dinner party, she said. His colleagues. I'd been up since 5 that morning, a long day. I'm a landscape architect. I'd been on a job site all day. In the heat, I was tired. I sat down at this dinner and I said something. Something small, a joke I think about a project I was working on. And Ryan laughed with everyone else. And then when they looked away, he looked at me. She stopped. What was the look? Like I was an embarrassment that he was generously tolerating. Caleb's jaw tightened. He kept his voice even. What did you do? I excused myself, went to the bathroom, looked in the mirror. A long pause. And I couldn't find myself. That's the only way I can describe it. I was looking at my own face, and I couldn't find who I was underneath everything I'd built around him. She looked down at her hands. I drove home that night without telling him I was leaving. He called 4 times. The 5th time I answered. He was furious. She paused. I told him I wasn't coming back. Good. She looked at him. That's all, Caleb said. Just good. Something in her face loosened, like she'd been braced for a qualifier. Good but, or good, although you should have, or any of the 100 things people say when they want to seem supportive while still revising your choices. He hadn't revised anything. Ryan's version, she said slowly, is that I had a breakdown, that I was irrational, that he gave me everything and I was too unstable to receive it. And people believed him. He's very... She searched for the word. He's very fluent in the language of being wronged. He knows exactly how to be the right amount of wounded. Not too much that would look weak, just enough to be sympathetic. And you couldn't fight it without looking like you were proving his point. Exactly. She turns to look at him. If I got angry, I was unstable. If I tried to correct the story, I was obsessed. If I withdrew, I was confirming that something was wrong with me. Her voice was controlled, but underneath it was something that had been compressed under pressure for a very long time. There was no version of my response that didn't fit the narrative he'd already written. There is one version, Caleb said. What? Living well without needing him to be the villain. She stared at him. Not because he isn't one, Caleb said, but because the version of your life where he matters enough to destroy, that's still his story. The version where you walk into your brother's wedding and you're present, not performing. Okay, not surviving the weekend actually. They're actually yourself. He paused. That's yours. The train swayed. Sophie looked at him for a long time. Who are you? She said quietly. Not rhetorical. Like she was genuinely trying to locate him. Someone who spent 3 years being so busy surviving that he forgot to live, Caleb said. I'm not saying it from the other side. I'm still in it. He held her gaze. But I recognized the territory. 3 rows back, Ryan had settled into a seat and was looking at his phone. Performing disinterest. Caleb could tell the slight angle of the head, the way the eyes flicked up every 90 seconds. He was recalibrating, regrouping, waiting for a moment when the armor cracked. The armor wasn't cracking. Caleb made sure of that, not with performance, not with posturing, but by the simple and inexhaustible act of being genuinely interested in the person beside him. Because there was no effective strategy against authentic attention. You couldn't undermine it. You couldn't reframe it. A man who was actually listening to a woman, actually hearing her, left no gap for a narrative that said she had no one. "The coffee story," Sophie said after a while. "At the harbor. I keep thinking about it." "What about it?" "You made it up immediately, without hesitating. Why the coffee?" He almost smiled. "I was drinking coffee when you sat down." "So you just used what was there?" He lifted his cup from the tray, still warm, still dark, roast still his. "In an emergency, you work with the materials available." "I'm an emergency." "You were 3 minutes ago." "And now?" He considered. "Now you're the person I'm having a conversation with on a 3-hour train ride." She seemed to sit with that for a moment. The way that sentence shifted things. The way it changed the frame from crisis to something else, something quieter, something that didn't have a specific name, but felt like room to breathe. "Tell me about your work," she said. "The real work, not the Navy, the now." "Emergency medical technician," he said. "I work a county route, mostly rural calls. I've been doing it 4 years." "Why did you leave the Navy?" "Lily." The word was simple and total. "When Maya got sick, I requested shore duty. When she died, I wasn't going back. Lily needed consistency. She needed me in the same place every night." He paused. "The EMT work felt close enough. The same basic function, go where the problem is, do what you can, get the person to the next safe place. Do you miss it, the Navy?" "I miss the clarity," he said. "In the field, the mission was the mission. You knew what you were doing and why. You knew what winning looked like." He turned the coffee cup in his hands. "Grief doesn't have that. There's no mission, no objective, no moment where someone tells you the job is done." "No," Sophie agreed quietly. "There isn't." "The EMT work helps," he continued, "because every shift there's something specific to solve. A problem with a clear perimeter. Someone who needs to be somewhere safer than they are." He paused. "I'm better at that than I am at the open-ended stuff." "The open-ended stuff being a complete person," he said simply. The honesty of it seemed to land physically. She shifted slightly, not away, but differently. "The way you shift when something true gets said in close proximity. You seem pretty complete to me," she said carefully. "You've known me for—" He checked his watch. 52 minutes. Sometimes 52 minutes is enough to see someone. Or it's exactly long enough for them to show you the edited version. "Is that what you're doing?" He looked at her. "No," he said. "Strangely not." She held his gaze. "Me neither," she said. And that was the moment, not dramatic, not marked by anything external, no shift in the light or the sound of the train, when the conversation changed direction. Not toward pretending. Away from it. They talked about her work. Sophie had started her landscape architecture firm 6 years earlier after working for a large firm in D.C. that had treated her projects the way a factory treats components, efficiently, anonymously, without interest in what they might become. She'd left with 2 clients, a pickup truck, and a business plan she'd written in a rented cabin over a long weekend. "Was it terrifying?" Caleb asked. "Completely. Worth it. Every single day." She said it without hesitation. "I design spaces where people actually live, backyards where kids play, gardens that someone sits in every morning with their coffee, hospital courtyards that patients can see from their windows." Her voice changed when she talked about it. The careful, controlled quality fell away, and something more unguarded moved in. "I did a project last year for a children's rehabilitation center. Outdoor therapy spaces. The therapists told me afterward that some of the kids were engaging outside who'd refused to come out of their rooms for weeks." She paused. "That's what I'm doing when I'm doing it right. I'm making the outside feel safe enough to enter." Caleb looked at her. She caught his expression. "What Nothing, he said. Just you come alive when you talk about it. She blinked. I come alive? The way your voice changes. The whole thing changes. He watched her. That's not nothing. That's not a job. That's a vocation. She was quiet for a moment. Ryan thought it was impractical, she said. He was in finance. He had opinions about return on investment and long-term scalability. She said the words carefully clinically, like she was quoting a textbook she didn't admire. He wanted me to consider merging with a larger firm, going back to the corporate model. He framed it as concern for my financial security. But it was something else. He didn't like that my work mattered to me more than his opinion of it. She said it quietly, like she was still working it out. He'd spent 2 years being the most important thing in my landscape, and when I'd talk about a project and my eyes would... She gestured vaguely. The way you just said when he saw that I think it threatened him. Because I could light up for something he hadn't given me. Caleb nodded slowly. He didn't say what he was thinking, that the man 3 rows back had spent 2 years trying to be the only source of light in her life, and had responded to her self-sufficiency the way weak people always respond to it by trying to extinguish it. He didn't say it because Sophie already knew it. She was just arriving at the knowledge in real time, sitting on a moving train, saying it out loud for maybe the first time. That was its own kind of important. Tell me something you love, he said instead. She looked at him. What? Something you love. Not work, just something, anything. A pause. Old diners, she said. The kind that have been there since the 60s and haven't updated anything. Laminate counters. Booths with duct tape on the seats. Coffee in the ceramic cups that's been terrible for 50 consecutive years, and somehow that's the whole point. Specific. I have very specific love, she said. I love the sound it makes when you step into a library, that specific quiet, that's different from any other kind of quiet. I love thunderstorms when you're inside. I love when a dog sees you and makes the decision in real time that you're trustworthy. She paused. I love when something that was broken gets fixed. He looked at her. The chair in my grandmother's kitchen, she continued. One of the legs cracked when I was 8. She wrapped it with twine and paint, and it held for 20 more years, and every time I sat in it, I felt like I was sitting in proof that things could be saved. A pause. I still look for that chair, in antique stores. I've never found it exactly, but I look. Caleb was quiet for a moment. What do you love? She asked. He didn't have to think about it. 7:45 in the morning, he said. When Lily is finally dressed and has her bag and is eating the last 3 bites of toast, and she always. Every single morning she finds something out the kitchen window to get distracted by. A bird or a squirrel, or once it was just a very interesting leaf. And I have to call her name 3 times to get her back. Every morning. He paused. I used to think I was annoyed by it. Then I realized I'd time my coffee around it. I'm waiting for it. Sophie smiled. Not a performance of warmth. The real thing. She's going to be something, she said. She already is, he said. The train had been moving for almost an hour and a half. Outside, the landscape had opened fully wide fields, tree lines, the occasional farmhouse. The compressed urgency of the city felt like something from a different story. Ryan had not moved again, but he hadn't left. And Caleb knew with the specific practiced certainty of someone who had spent years reading situations before they became crises that Ryan was waiting, that he had a plan, that whatever he'd recalibrated was going to surface before the train reached its destination. That was fine. Caleb had spent his entire adult life preparing for whatever came next, but right now, he was not thinking about Ryan. I was thinking about the fact that for 90 minutes he had talked more honestly about himself than he had in 3 years. Not the performing version. Not the strong Navy widower who was handling everything. The actual version. The man who cried quiet in bathrooms. The man who timed his coffee around his daughter's distractions. The man who still wore a bracelet because washing a coffee mug felt like a betrayal he wasn't ready for. And Sophie hadn't tried to fix any of it. She hadn't offered him the soft, careful sympathy that made him feel like a patient. She'd just sat beside him and let it be true. He hadn't realized how much he needed that. He hadn't known that need existed in him until it was suddenly being met. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "After everything I've told you, I think that's earned." "Why me on the train? You walked through the whole car." She was quiet for a moment. "You weren't looking at me," she said. He waited. "Everyone else, when I walked in, they looked. Men especially, which I know sounds like a bad thing, and sometimes it is. But this was different. When Ryan walked in behind me, they all sort of registered him, like they were calibrating." She looked at Caleb's profile. "You were looking out the window. You were completely inside yourself. You weren't watching the room at all. And that made you choose me. It made me think that maybe you were the one person in this car who wasn't part of whatever performance Ryan was about to demand." A pause. "You seemed like someone who wouldn't be impressed by him." "I'm not." "I noticed." A small smile. "The way you looked at him. Not hostile, just unimpressed. Like he was something that needed to be addressed and then gotten back to the more interesting thing." "You were the more interesting thing." She looked at him. "Still are," he said simply. The words didn't have romance in them, at least they weren't aimed that way. They were the statement of a man who had spent the better part of 2 hours in genuine conversation with a genuine person and was stating a fact. But something in Sophie's eyes shifted. A softening maybe, or a cautious opening. The specific, careful expression of someone who has learned to be precise about what they allow themselves to feel and is doing the slow, deliberate math of whether this is the moment to be less precise. She looked back at the window. "I'm scared," she said. "About the wedding. About all of it. About walking in there and everyone seeing me and doing that thing people do where they're kind, but their eyes are tracking for the evidence of what they've been told. The way they'll look at me and be looking for instability." Her voice stayed even. "I know how to handle hard things. I've handled hard things. But I hate being watched while I do it." "You're not going to be alone in there," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "Caleb." She said his name carefully. "You don't have to do this past the train. Seriously. I grabbed your hand on a moving vehicle and invented a marriage you've already gone far beyond any reasonable." "Sophie." She stopped. "I'm going to tell you something," he said, "and I want you to hear it without arguing." She waited. "I have not had a conversation like this in 3 years," he said. "Not with anyone. Not my sister, not my coworkers, not the people in my life who love me." He paused. "I forgot what it felt like to talk to someone who wasn't being careful with me, who wasn't treating me like something that might break." He turned to look at her. "You asked me questions I haven't been asked. You said true things without apologizing for them. And I—" He stopped. Something moved in his expression that was unfamiliar even to himself. "I don't want to go back to the window and the headphones and the invisible." He looked at her steadily. "That's why. It's not obligation. It's not rescue. It's—" He searched for the right word. "Selfishness, maybe. I want to see what this weekend looks like." Sophie held his gaze. Her eyes were bright. Not tears, or not only tears, but the specific brightness that comes when something that's been held under pressure for a very long time is briefly, carefully allowed some air. "Okay," she said. "Okay. Okay." She turned back to the window. "But you should know Daniel is going to ask you about the Navy for 45 minutes straight. I can handle 45 minutes of Navy questions. He's going to ask about weapon systems. I'll keep it appropriate." He asked Ryan the same questions. Ryan made everything up and Daniel didn't notice for an entire dinner. She paused. "Which should have told me something." "You noticed eventually." "I did." "Then the system works." She turned to look at him with an expression that was maybe the most complicated thing he'd seen her wear. Exhaustion and warmth, and something quietly terrified, and something quietly tentatively glad. "The system works," she repeated. And then from 3 rows back a voice. Not Ryan approaching, Ryan projecting, loud enough to carry but contained enough to maintain plausible deniability, the specific volume of a man who wanted to be overheard while appearing to be on a phone call. "Yeah, she's here, sitting with some guy. I don't know, it looks like she found someone to play house with for the train ride." A pause. A manufactured laugh. "Don't worry about it. I'll see her at the wedding. We'll talk then." The volume dropped. The message had been delivered. Caleb felt Sophie's hand tighten in his. Not with fear, with anger. And he thought, there it is. There's the woman who walked away from a dinner party and didn't come back. That's the person who's been buried under 8 months of someone else's narrative. He didn't squeeze back to calm her. He let her hold it. "He wants you to react," he said quietly. "I know." "Don't." "I know." A beat. "It's hard." "Yeah," he said. "It's supposed to be." She breathed, in and out. The train moved. Ryan's voice didn't come again. "He's good," she said finally. "He's practiced," Caleb said. "There's a difference." "What's the difference?" "Good means it comes from somewhere real. Practiced means it's a skill set." He paused. "Skills stop working when the situation changes. Real things adapt." Sophie looked at him. "You're talking about more than Ryan." "Maybe." "Are you talking about yourself?" He considered. "I'm talking about both of us," he said. She held that thought for a moment, turning it carefully, the way you turn something fragile, that you're not sure yet, is strong. Outside, the first signs of their destination were beginning to appear on the horizon. Distant water towers, the scattered edges of a smaller city reaching outward. Caleb looked at the bracelet on his wrist. He thought about Maya. He thought about what she'd say if she could see him now, sitting on a train, holding a stranger's hand, having the most honest conversation he'd had in years. He knew exactly what she'd say. She'd say, "It's about time, Caleb James." She'd say it the way she said everything, with the certainty of someone who had already decided the outcome was going to be good, and was merely waiting for the world to catch up. He almost smiled. "What?" Sophie asked. "Nothing," he said. "I was just—" He stopped. "Someone told me once that the best moments in life are the ones you couldn't have planned." Sophie went very still. "You were listening," she said. "I always listen," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "That was my father's line," she said quietly. "I know," he said. "You told me. I know you know." She shook her head slowly. "I meant it feels strange when someone you just met says something that sounds like someone you loved. Does it feel bad?" She thought about that. "No," she said. "That's the strange part. It doesn't feel bad at all." The train moved on. Ryan sat 3 rows back waiting for a crack that wasn't coming. And Caleb Harrison, who had spent 3 years being strong in the way that meant alone, sat with a woman whose hand was warm in his. Now no longer cold, no longer trembling, and felt with the specific startling clarity of something that hadn't happened in so long, it had almost stopped being possible, that the world was slightly larger than it had been 2 hours ago. That tomorrow was a thing worth having. That this, whatever this was not nothing. Outside, the city was growing closer. 1 hour remained. Neither of them mentioned it. The train pulled into Charlottesville Station at 12:47 in the afternoon. Caleb felt the shift in Sophie before the brakes engaged, the way her breathing changed, the way her posture reorganized itself from the open, unhurried quality it had settled into over the past 2 hours, back into something more managed, more controlled. Like watching someone put on a coat before walking into cold weather. She hadn't let go of his hand. He hadn't pulled away. Ryan was already standing. Caleb had tracked the movement, the deliberate rise, the unhurried collection of a jacket and carry-on bag, the performance of a man who had somewhere important to be. He didn't look their direction, which meant he was very carefully not looking their direction. "He's going to be at the rehearsal dinner tonight," Sophie said. Her voice was calm, steady, the kind of steady that was assembled rather than natural. "What time?" 7. "It's at a restaurant downtown. Elena's family reserved the back room." She paused. "Her parents love Ryan. He did some kind of investment thing for Elena's father 2 years ago. There's gratitude there that's going to make this—" She stopped. "Complicated," Caleb said. "That's a generous word for it." The train stopped fully. Around them, people stood, reached for bags, resumed the ordinary motion of their ordinary lives. Caleb watched Ryan move toward the doors, with the fluid confidence of a man who believed the whole room was organized around his exit. He was already composing his version of tonight, Caleb thought. Already deciding how to enter, what to say, how to position himself at the table so that the story he'd spent 8 months building would have the evening to reinforce itself. Caleb stood. He reached up for his own bag, a simple navy duffel, the kind of bag that made no claims, and then without discussion, he reached for Sophie's carry-on too. She looked at him. "I have it," she said. "I know you do," he said. "I've got it anyway." She let him take it. They stepped off the train into the warm, heavy air of a Virginia summer afternoon, and for a moment they both just stood on the platform, while the crowd dispersed around them, and Caleb looked at the woman beside him and thought, she doesn't know what she looks like right now. She thinks she looks like someone holding herself together. She doesn't realize she looks like someone who's about to walk forward. "My brother is picking me up," she said. "He should be outside." "Okay, Caleb." She turned to face him. The rehearsed steadiness was there, but underneath it something more honest was showing through, the same honesty that had surfaced between them on the train in the long, unguarded hour when they'd stopped pretending to pretend and had just talked. "You can go. Seriously. You've done more than anyone could have asked for. You don't have an obligation here." "Sophie." "I'm just saying." "I know what you're saying." He looked at her directly. "I told you on the train. I'm here because I want to be. That hasn't changed in the last 4 minutes." She searched his face. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Honestly. Why does a man who doesn't know me want to walk into a wedding weekend with someone else's family drama and someone else's?" "Because I haven't wanted to do anything in 3 years," he said. That stopped her. "I wake up," he said, "and I do what needs to be done. I go to work. I make Lily's lunch. I read the bedtime story. I do the thing that's in front of me, and then I do the next thing. That's what my life has been. Not bad, not a complaint, just..." He stopped. "Motion. Not direction. Motion." He held her gaze. "Today, I have direction. Even if it's just toward tonight. Toward whatever comes next. I haven't felt that since..." He didn't finish it. He didn't have to. Sophie was quiet. "Okay," she said finally. The same word she'd used on the train. Carrying the same weight, not casual, not small. The weight of a decision being made by someone who understood the cost of making it. "Okay," he said. They walked toward the exit. Daniel Bennett was waiting at the curb in a green pickup truck that had seen better decades, one arm resting on the open window. His face doing the specific thing faces do when they've been worried and are now trying to not show how worried they were. He was younger than Caleb had pictured. 28, Sophie had said, but he looked it in the way that some people carry their age openly without armor. Brown hair that went in approximate 3 directions. A smile that came fast and didn't seem to calculate anything. He got out when he saw Sophie. "Hey, you." He pulled her into a hug that was not brief, not polite, not the back-patting hug of people who've drifted. It was the hug of someone who had been genuinely relieved to see her, and was expressing that in the most direct available way. Sophie held on for a second longer than she usually would. Caleb saw it. "I'm glad you came," Daniel said into her shoulder. "Of course I came," she said. "It's your wedding." "I know, but..." He pulled back and looked at her. Something passed between them, siblings communicating in the compressed shorthand of shared history, the language that doesn't need sentences. "I know this weekend is..." "I'm good," she said. "I promise." He looked at her for a moment, and then his eyes moved to Caleb, who was standing slightly back, holding 2 bags, and deliberately taking up as little space as possible, which was a skill he'd developed in exactly the kind of situations where the most useful thing you could be was present without being intrusive. "Oh," Daniel said. "This is Caleb," Sophie said. "He was on the train. We..." A pause. A small breath. "He's here for the weekend." Daniel's expression moved through several things in rapid succession. Then it settled on something that was mostly curious, and partly something else. A careful brotherly assessment that was doing its job without advertising itself. He extended his hand to Caleb. "Daniel," he said. "Caleb Harrison." He shook the hand. Firm, brief, real. Congratulations on the wedding. Thanks. Daniel glanced between them. So you guys know each other from Annapolis, Sophie said, which was technically the original cover story. Daniel looked at his sister, then at Caleb. Then, at the way Sophie was standing, the specific quality of how she was standing, the slight looseness in her shoulders, that wasn't her default setting. The thing that said someone had been given room to breathe. Okay, Daniel said. He picked up Sophie's bag from Caleb and tossed it in the truck bed. There's room at Elena's parents' place. They've got the extra guest room. He looked at Caleb. You're welcome to it. Fair warning, it has a quilt with ducks on it. I don't make the rules. Caleb almost smiled. I've slept in worse. Navy, Daniel said, clocking the jacket without effort. Former. I knew it. Daniel pointed at him like he'd won something. The way you were standing. I played soccer with a SEAL for 2 years in college, and you have the same thing, this. He gestured vaguely. This quality of being somewhere completely, while also being ready to leave immediately. That's a generous description of hypervigilance, Caleb said. Daniel laughed. A real one, surprised, unguarded. Sophie looked at Caleb with an expression that said, See, I told you about him. They got in the truck. The drive to the venue, the Whitfield property. An old family estate the Reyes family had rented for the wedding weekend, took 20 minutes through roads that got progressively quieter and greener. Daniel talked the whole way. About Elena. About the ceremony setup. About how his college roommate had already broken the gift registry twice. About the fact that he'd tried to write his own vows 3 different times, and each version was either too long or made him cry before he finished the first paragraph. Elena said to just talk to her like I always talk to her, he said. Which sounds easy and is somehow the hardest possible instruction. What do you say to her normally? Caleb asked. What? When it's just you two, what do you talk about? Daniel thought about it. Everything. Nothing. Yesterday I spent 20 minutes telling her about a documentary I watched about deep-sea fish. She asked 4 questions about it. She's a 2nd-grade teacher. She has no reason to care about deep-sea fish. He paused. She cared because I cared. That's your vow, Caleb said. Daniel glanced at him in the rearview mirror. Right there, Caleb said. What you just said. The fish. That's the whole thing. A long pause. Huh, Daniel said slowly. Sophie turned and looked at Caleb. He kept his eyes on the road ahead. She turned back to her window. But there was a small movement at the corner of her mouth, something she didn't quite suppress and didn't quite try to. The Whitfield estate came into view around a curve, a long white house with a wraparound porch, the kind of place that had been hosting important days in people's lives for long enough that it had absorbed the emotional residue of all of them, carried it in the floorboards, and the window frames wore it in the way old, well-used places wear things. There were cars in the gravel drive, voices from somewhere around the back, and on the porch, talking to an older man with silver hair and the comfortable bearing of someone who had spent a long time being the most at ease person in any room, Ryan Whitmore. He saw them the moment the truck pulled in. Caleb felt the awareness hit Sophie beside him. Not a flinch, nothing dramatic, just the slight tightening that happened when someone's nervous system registered a threat and the person it belonged to refused to let it show. Ryan raised a hand. The smallest wave. Pleasant. Calibrated. Caleb watched the older man follow Ryan's gaze toward the truck. Something moved through the older man's expression, recognition, and then something more careful. That's George Reyes, Sophie said quietly. Elena's father. And he's already with Ryan. He arrived yesterday. A pause. He's been here a full day to be charming, Caleb said. He's very good at it. I know. He looked at her. Don't think about what story he's told already. Think about what's true. She met his eyes. And what's true? She asked quietly. That you are the sister of the groom, he said. And you're at this wedding because you love your brother. Everything else is noise. She held his gaze. Everything else is noise, she repeated. Say it like you mean it. Everything else is noise, she said again, and this time it had weight behind it. They got out of the truck. Ryan descended the porch steps with the easy movement of a man on his home turf, which was, Caleb noted, the specific kind of insult that required no words. Making yourself at home in the space where someone else is supposed to feel welcome was a power move that most people didn't even consciously register. Caleb registered it. "Sophie," Ryan said. Warm. Delighted almost. "You made it." "Of course I made it," she said. His eyes moved to Caleb. The assessment was faster this time, more practiced than on the train. He'd had the ride from the station to regroup, to recalibrate, to decide on his angle. "Ryan Whitmore," he said, extending a hand. Caleb took it. "Caleb Harrison." The handshake was what handshakes are when two people are doing more with them than shaking hands, a brief exchange of information. Ryan's grip was deliberate. Not crushing, but deliberate. The grip of a man who believed pressure was always worth applying. Caleb shook hands the way he'd learned to shake hands with certain superior officers, who were also certain kinds of men. Firm, neutral, revealing nothing. Returning the same energy without escalating it. The pressure equivalent of noted, not impressed, moving on. Something shifted in Ryan's eyes. George Reyes had come down from the porch as well. He was a tall man, mid-60s, with the forthright manner of someone who had built things and was proud of it. His handshake with Caleb was different, genuinely curious, no performance. "George Reyes," he said, "Elena's father." "Caleb Harrison, congratulations, you must be excited." "Terrified and overjoyed in equal parts," George said with the candor of a man comfortable enough to say what was actually true. "Elena's mother has been up since 5, making sure the florist understood what exactly mauve means, which is apparently not the same thing as dusty rose, despite what anyone says." He glanced at Sophie. "Sophie, it's good to see you." "You too, George." And there it was, the slight care in his voice. Not unkindness, just the specific, careful warmth of a man who had heard a story and was navigating around it. George Reyes was not a cruel man, Caleb could tell. He was a man who'd been given information and hadn't yet been given reason to question it. That could change. It wasn't Caleb's job to change it today. Elena appeared at the front door, small with bright dark eyes, and the contained, purposeful energy of someone who was managing 17 things simultaneously and making it look like 6. She came down the steps and went straight to Sophie. "You're here," she said, and hugged her with the same directness Daniel had. "I'm so glad you're here. I wouldn't miss it. I know you wouldn't." Elena pulled back and looked at her, and Caleb saw in Elena Reyes's face something that George's didn't have yet: unguarded fondness, and underneath it, a clear-eyed awareness that said she had her own read on the last 8 months, and it was not Ryan's version. "This must be Caleb," Elena said, turning to him. "He must be," Caleb agreed. She smiled at that, a quick, appreciating smile. "Daniel's going to want to talk to you about the Navy. I'm warning you now so you can prepare." "He warned me in the truck." "Good. Sometimes he forgets to warn people, and then it becomes a whole thing." She glanced between them, the same glance Daniel had given in the truck, the same careful cataloging, and then she turned back toward the house. "Come in, we've got lunch set out. Rehearsals at 4. They moved toward the house as a group. Ryan fell into step on Caleb's other side. It was done smoothly, casually. The way you might naturally adjust your path to walk beside someone. Only someone paying attention would have read the intention in it. Caleb was paying attention. "So you and Sophie," Ryan said low. Conversational, pitched for Caleb's ears only. "The train." "That's right," Caleb said. "You just happened to be on the same train." "That's usually how trains work." A brief pause. "She mentioned me." Caleb kept his voice easy. "Should she have—" "We were engaged," Ryan said. "Not too long ago. I thought maybe—" "She mentioned the engagement, yeah," Caleb said. He glanced at Ryan without stopping. She moved on. People do. Another pause, longer this time. Caleb could feel the recalibration happening, the small seismic shift of a man encountering an obstacle that didn't respond to his usual tools. Ryan was practiced with uncertainty, with neediness, with people who could be made to feel that their reality required his endorsement. He was not practiced with someone who simply wasn't interested in that exchange. She can be difficult, Ryan said. The warmth had lowered in his voice now, barely perceptibly, but it had lowered. I say that with care. She's been through a lot. She has a hard time. Ryan, Caleb said pleasantly. Yeah. I'm going to go have lunch with Sophie and her family. He looked at him once directly without heat. I'll let you finish that sentence in your head. He walked forward. Ryan didn't follow. Inside the house held the particular warmth of a place where a large loving family had descended for a once-in-a-lifetime occasion. Food everywhere, voices overlapping the specific, beautiful chaos of people who care about each other, trying to coordinate. Elena's mother, Margaret, was a compact woman with decisive opinions about flowers and an immediate and unconditional acceptance of anyone her daughter was glad to see. She hugged Sophie like she'd known her for years. She shook Caleb's hand, looked at him for 2 seconds and said, "You look like someone who can carry things. We need someone to move tables at 4 o'clock." "Yes, ma'am," Caleb said. "Excellent." She moved off to correct someone about the centerpieces. Daniel appeared with a plate and a question about naval vessel classifications that Caleb answered for 11 minutes while eating a very good sandwich. He watched Sophie across the room sitting with Elena and a woman who turned out to be Elena's sister, Clara. The three of them with their heads together over something that kept making them laugh. Not performed laughter. The real kind, the kind that builds on itself. Sophie caught his eye once across the room. Something passed between them. Not a word, not a signal, just the simple recognition of two people who had been strangers 4 hours ago and were no longer quite that. He looked back at Daniel, who was explaining why he'd always wanted to visit Annapolis. "We went there," Caleb said, "because Daniel was Sophie's brother and deserved the real story eventually, but not today. And in the meantime, great harbor, good coffee if you know where to go." "Sophie loves it there," Daniel said. "I know," Caleb said. He caught himself. "She mentioned it." Daniel looked at him for a moment with those open, uncomplicated eyes. "She seems okay," he said quietly. "Sophie, she seems actually okay, not performing okay." "She is," Caleb said. And then, because it was true, and because Daniel deserved to hear something true, "She's stronger than she's been given credit for, by a lot of people." Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. "I know," he said. "I know who she is." A pause. I couldn't." He stopped, looked at his plate. "I should have been louder. Earlier. I should have pushed back on the story that was going around." Something moved through his expression, the specific guilt of someone who loves someone and still failed them in a particular and specific way. "I let people believe things because I didn't want conflict before the wedding. I told myself I was protecting the weekend, but I was protecting yourself," Caleb said, without judgment. Daniel looked up. "You can fix that," Caleb said. "Not today, today's about you and Elena, but you can fix it." A pause. "Yeah," Daniel said. "Yeah, I know. The rehearsal at 4 was held in the garden behind the house under a pergola threaded with white lights that would look incredible at 7 o'clock on Saturday evening. Caleb stood with the other non-party guests along the edge and watched Sophie in her role as maid of honor stand at Elena's side, straight-backed, clear-eyed, doing the job with the kind of focused competence that made it look simple. Ryan stood on the groom's side of the guest section. He watched Sophie. Not with longing, with strategy. Caleb saw it. The way Ryan tracked Sophie's small adjustments, her interactions, the moments when she laughed at something the officiant said. Looking for the version of her that matched the story he'd been telling. Looking for instability. For brittleness. For the crack that would validate him. He wasn't finding it. And the not finding was making him work harder. The rehearsal finished at 5:15. People dispersed toward the house to change for dinner. Ryan made his move at 5:20. He found Sophie on the path between the garden and the back door, not an accident. Caleb recognized the geography of it, and he stepped into her path with that warm, reasonable face and said just loud enough for the 2 or 3 people within earshot to hear, "Sophie, can we talk just for a minute? Before tonight, I'd really rather we not make the dinner uncomfortable for Daniel and Elena." It was perfectly constructed. Concern for Daniel and Elena. reasonableness. The implication, gentle, just an implication that Sophie was the variable who might make things uncomfortable. The suggestion that a private conversation, one where there were no witnesses, was the mature and considerate choice. Caleb was 12 feet away. He watched Sophie. He saw the specific thing he'd been watching for the old reflex, the one that had been built over 2 years, the one that said, engage, manage, make the conflict go away, because the cost of not managing it is too high. The body remembers even when the mind has decided differently. Sophie's posture shifted, and then it shifted back. She squared her shoulders in a way that was almost invisible unless you were watching for it, the kind of micro-adjustment that isn't for anyone else's benefit, that's purely internal. A woman reminding her own spine what it's made of. "There's nothing I want to discuss privately with you, Ryan," she said. Clear, not unkind, not defensive. "If you have something to say, you can say it." Ryan's smile stayed in place. "I just thought for Daniel's sake." "Daniel is my brother," she said. "You don't get to use him as a reason to get me alone." A flicker. Just a flicker behind the smile. "That's not what I'm doing." "Okay," she said. And then she simply stepped around him and continued toward the house. No scene, no performance, no argument. She just walked away. Caleb exhaled. He fell into step beside her as she approached the door. "You okay?" he said quietly. "Yes," she said. And then a beat later, "That was the first time I've done that." "What?" Walked away without apologizing. She looked at her own hands for a moment. Without trying to make it okay for him, without... She stopped. "How does it feel?" A pause. "Like something just got very slightly lighter," she said. They changed for dinner. Caleb had packed for the specific contingency of being a last-minute wedding attendant without planning to be one, the result of an adult lifetime of being deployed on short notice, which meant he had a white shirt and dark trousers in his duffel that were appropriate without being conspicuous. Sophie came downstairs in a deep blue dress that was not the green dress from the train. She'd done something with her hair still up, but differently with less apology in it. She looked like someone who had made a decision. She saw Caleb at the bottom of the stairs and stopped. "Too much?" she asked, and he understood the question wasn't about the dress. "Not at all," he said. The rehearsal dinner was at Harvest Table, a restaurant in downtown Charlottesville, with exposed brick walls and long wooden tables and the warm amber kind of light that makes everyone look like they've been loved. The Reyes family had taken the back room, 23 people in total, split between a head table and 2 long tables on either side. Sophie was seated at the head table as maid of honor. Caleb was seated at the table to the right between Daniel's college roommate Marcus and Elena's cousin Patricia, who asked him within 3 minutes whether he'd ever considered being on television because she produced a local morning show and said he had, and she used this exact phrase, strong anchor energy. "I don't know what that means," Caleb said. "It means you look like someone people would trust to tell them the news," Patricia said, like this was the highest possible compliment. Ryan was at the other long table between George Reyes and a family friend named Tom, who'd known the Reyes family for 20 years. He was at his best attentive, self-deprecating at precisely the right moments, asking George about his business with the specific flattery of genuine interest. Caleb watched him work the table from across the room. I wasn't going to underestimate Ryan Whitmore. The man was genuinely talented at what he did. The performance was polished to the point where calling it a performance felt reductive. It had long since become a reflex, a way of being as natural to Ryan as breathing. But there was a thing that Caleb had learned over years of working alongside people in high-pressure situations. Performance, no matter how polished, had limits. Real things didn't. At the head table, Sophie was talking to Elena's mother, Margaret, who had appeared to have made a decision about Sophie sometime between the rehearsal and the dinner, and was now treating her with the full direct warmth she extended to people she'd decided were family. Caleb watched Sophie's face as Margaret talked, the way she relaxed by degrees, the way she let herself be received, the specific vulnerability of someone being genuinely welcomed when they'd steeled themselves for combat. He watched her and thought about what she'd said on the train, about the chair in her grandmother's kitchen, about looking for proof that broken things could be saved. He thought about the coffee mug he still hadn't washed. He thought about the packed lunches and the bedtime stories and the man he'd become in the space left behind by everything that was taken. I thought, when was the last time someone let me be in the room the way Margaret is letting Sophie be in the room right now? Not strong, not managing, just present. Marcus, the college roommate, was telling a story about Daniel's worst soccer game that involved a penalty kick. A small child who had wandered onto the field, and what Marcus described as the most heroic avoidance maneuver in amateur athletic history. Caleb laughed. It surprised him a little, the spontaneity of it. Not performed, not polite. Just the simple reflex of finding something genuinely funny. "You've got a good laugh," Marcus said, looking mildly startled. "What?" "Like you don't laugh often. But when you do, it's," Marcus gestured, "real. You make that sound unusual." "Man, look around any room," Marcus said. 50% of the laughter in any given gathering is people performing being entertained. Caleb looked around the room. "50's low," he said. Marcus pointed at him. "This man gets it." Across the room, Ryan was telling George Reyes something that made the older man nod seriously. George's face held the particular expression of a man receiving important information. The kind of expression that Ryan Caleb knew was very good at generating. Whatever the story was, it was going in. Caleb watched Sophie, and then he watched George, and he thought about what Sophie had said. "There's no version of my response that doesn't fit the narrative he's already written." He thought about the 8 months of this. The long, patient construction of a reality where Sophie Bennett was the problem. And he thought about what he'd told her on the train. Living well without needing him to be the villain. He still believed it. But he was also clear-eyed enough to know that sometimes before the living well could happen, something else had to happen first. Not exposure, not confrontation. Truth said quietly to the right person at the right time. The dinner moved through its courses. Speeches happened. The best man, a laconic man named Yusuf, who delivered 3 devastatingly funny jokes, and then said something genuinely beautiful about love being the decision you make every day after the first one. Elena's mother cried in the best possible way. Daniel held Elena's hand under the table for the duration and tried very hard not to cry, and failed immediately at the second sentence. Sophie watched Daniel from the head table, and her expression was the kind of expression that doesn't translate into words. The pure, uncomplicated love of someone watching someone they love be exactly where they're supposed to be. Caleb watched Sophie watching Daniel. I thought about what it meant to belong somewhere. To have people who knew your full history, who had watched you be small, and had watched you grow, and still showed up at the right moments, with a hug that lasted 2 seconds longer than expected. He thought about Lily. I thought about the conversations he needed to have with his daughter when she was older. Not about Maya, those were already happening in the small, careful ways you have them with a 7-year-old, but about life. About how loss worked. About the fact that your capacity for love doesn't diminish with use. It does the opposite. He took out his phone under the table and sent a text to Rachel Lilly. "Okay." The response came in 30 seconds. "She's perfect. Currently teaching the cat to play checkers. The cat is winning." A pause and then, "Why are you texting from wherever you are?" He thought about how to answer that. "Reminding myself I'm okay." 3 dots. Then Caleb. "Are you actually okay?" He looked up from the phone. Across the room, Sophie was laughing at something Elena had said, unguarded, real. The laugh she'd been suppressing for 8 months. Finding room in a warm restaurant full of people who were glad she was there. He looked back at his phone. "Yeah," he texted. "I think I actually am." Dessert arrived. The conversations loosened the way. Conversations loosen in the last hour of a good dinner, when the food is mostly gone, and the wine has settled, and people stop maintaining their formal arrangements, and start drifting toward the people they actually want to talk to. Ryan drifted toward George again. Caleb stood. He picked up his glass, still mostly full. He'd been careful, and he walked around the edge of the room toward George Reyes, who was standing now near the window, with a small glass of something amber. "Mr. Reyes," he said. George looked at him. The earlier warmth was still there. "George, please. Mr. Reyes makes me feel like I'm about to be audited." George. Caleb stood beside him at the window. I wanted to thank you for having Sophie and for having me. Elena loves Sophie like a sister, George said simply. That's reason enough. Caleb nodded. He looked out at the dark street. Can I ask you something? He said. He kept his voice easy, conversational, the same register he'd used when talking to Daniel about the Navy. Go ahead. What did you want for Elena before Ryan, before all of this? He gestured vaguely. What kind of man did you imagine for your daughter? George looked at him with the measured attention of a man who had not expected that question. Someone steady, he said after a moment. Someone who, when things got hard, moved toward her instead of away. He paused. Elena's mother and I, we had years that were hard. Business trouble when Elena was small. Medical trouble when her sister was in high school. And the thing I learned, the thing I'd want for my daughter, is someone who gets closer when things are difficult. Not someone who performs well when things are easy. Caleb nodded slowly. She has that in Daniel, he said. She does, George agreed, and then quieter. I know what you're doing. Caleb looked at him. You're not subtle, George said. But his voice wasn't cold. It was more tired, more honest. You're a steady man. You're trying to tell me something about Ryan without saying it directly, because you know if you say it directly, I might defend what I think I know. Caleb didn't say anything. Ryan came here and he talked about Sophie, George said slowly. For an hour last night. He was kind about it. That's the thing, he was genuinely kind. He was concerned. He was... George stopped, looked at his glass. He was very good at being concerned. He is, Caleb said. I've built a business for 30 years, George said. I can read a room. I can read a deal. I thought I could read people. He paused. But I'm sitting here now, and I'm watching Sophie across this room, and she doesn't look like what he described. She looks like someone who survived something and came out steadier for it. A long pause. She looks like someone who is exactly where she belongs. Caleb said nothing. I don't know who's telling the truth, George said quietly. I think you do, Caleb said. A silence. George Reyes looked across the room at Sophie Bennett, who was at that exact moment with her arm around Elena. The two of them bent over something on Elena's phone, laughing. He looked for a long time. What does she do? George asked. For work. Landscape architect. She has her own firm. She designs spaces where... Caleb thought about how she'd said it on the train, the way her voice had changed. She designs spaces where people feel safe enough to be outside. George was quiet. That's good work, he said finally. Yes, Caleb agreed. It is. They stood in silence for a moment. Then George said, I need to talk to my wife. He moved away. Caleb stayed at the window. Ryan appeared at his elbow, approximately 40 seconds later. He'd been watching. He'd seen the conversation with George. The pleasant mask was fully intact, but Caleb could hear the change in his voice underneath it. The slightest compression, the specific sound of controlled agitation. I don't know what you think you're doing, Ryan said quietly. Having a conversation, Caleb said. You've known her for 1 day. I know. Then you don't... Ryan! Caleb turned to face him for the first time in a direct, unhurried way. Not aggressive, not performed. The calm of a man who has stood in situations that required actual courage, and is, as a result, no longer interested in situations that only simulate it. You don't need me to be your enemy. I'm not going to expose you or make a scene or fight with you over a woman neither of us owns. He held the man's gaze. But you should understand something. Ryan waited. The story you've been telling, Caleb said, is built on her being what you said she was. Unstable, unreliable, too much. He paused. She's none of those things. And every hour she's in a room with people who can see that the story gets a little harder to hold. A long silence. I loved her, Ryan said. And the thing was, the thing that made it complicated, that made Caleb not entirely dismiss it. He sounded like he meant it. Or like he'd told himself the version of events where it was true for long enough that the distinction no longer existed. I believe you, Caleb said, in the way you know how to love. He paused. But loving someone and needing to own their narrative are different things. One of them is love. The other one is something else. Ryan said nothing. She's going to be fine, Caleb said quietly. Not because I'm here. Because she was always going to be fine. She just needed the room to be. He walked back toward the table. The dinner ended at 9:30. People dispersed toward cars and the long night before the last full day of preparation. Sophie found Caleb on the front steps of the restaurant while coats were being collected. "What did you say to George?" she asked. "I asked him what he wanted for Elena." She studied him. That's all. And then he came to his own conclusions. Caleb. Sophie. He looked at her. "I didn't say anything about Ryan. I didn't defend you or argue your case. I just gave him space to look at what was in front of him." She was quiet for a moment. "He came and talked to me before dessert," she said. "George, he found me while you were at the window." Something moved through her face, something fragile and important. "He asked about my work. He asked what kind of landscapes I designed. And when I told him, he said—" She stopped. "What?" "He said Elena had been talking about redoing the garden at their house for 3 years. He said maybe we could talk next week." She looked down. He said it like it was simple, like it was just— Her voice was careful. "Like I was just a person he'd like to know." Caleb waited. "I don't know what you said to him," she said. "But I don't think I realized until this exact moment how long it's been since someone just—" She stopped. "Cleared some space," he offered. She looked up at him. "Yeah," she said softly. "Cleared some space." Above them, the stars were starting to appear through the summer haze. The restaurant noise filtered out through the glass doors, warm and distant. A car started somewhere in the lot. Daniel and Elena came out holding hands, Daniel saying something in Elena's ear that made her press her face against his shoulder. Caleb watched them. He thought about the bracelet on his wrist. He thought about what it meant that he'd stopped reaching for it every 30 minutes and had only just now, standing on these steps, noticed that he hadn't been reaching for it. He didn't know what that meant. He wasn't ready to know what it meant. But he noticed it, and he let the noticing be what it was. Not a betrayal, not a replacement, just a fact. A small, quiet fact about a man who had started a morning being invisible on a train and was ending the evening standing on a restaurant step in Charlottesville, Virginia, beside a woman whose laugh he already knew, 2 versions of feeling the specific, terrifying aliveness of someone for whom tomorrow had suddenly, without warning, become a thing he wanted. Sophie looked at the sky. "Tomorrow's the wedding," she said. "Yeah. It's going to be a lot." "Probably." "Are you?" She glanced at him. "Are you sure you want to be there for all of it?" He looked at her. "Sophie." "Yeah. Stop asking me if I'm sure." She turned to look at him. "I'm sure," he said. A pause. "Okay," she said. There it was. The same word for the 3rd time, carrying more each time she said it. The stars held. The night moved around them. Tomorrow was coming. Neither of them was afraid of it anymore. The morning of the wedding came in quietly. Caleb woke before anyone else. Old habit. The body, keeping its own schedule, regardless of circumstance, and sat on the edge of the guest bed with the duck quilt pooled at his feet, and thought about the fact that he was in Charlottesville, Virginia, in a room he'd never been in before, preparing for a day that had not existed in any version of his life 48 hours ago. He thought about Lily. He called Rachel at 6:45, knowing she'd be up. She answered on the 2nd ring. "You're calling early. Is she awake?" She woke up at 6 and asked me to make the eggs in the shape of a star. I told her I didn't know how to do that. She told me it was easy and then showed me. We are eating star eggs. Caleb sat with that image for a moment. His daughter at Rachel's kitchen table, instructing an adult on the proper geometry of breakfast, and felt the specific ache of missing someone you love, while also knowing they are exactly where they need to be. "Rachel." "Yeah." "I met someone." A silence. Not the silence of surprise. The silence of someone choosing their words with the specific care of a woman who loved her brother and had been waiting for this sentence and was terrified of saying the wrong thing in response to it. "Tell me," she said. Her name is Sophie. She's a landscape architect. She has her own firm. She's brave in a way she doesn't fully know yet. He paused. I spent 2 hours on a train with her, and then came to Charlottesville for her brother's wedding. Another silence. Caleb James Harrison, Rachel said. I know. You got on a different train. I know. Because of a woman you'd known for 2 hours. I know. I'm not criticizing, she said quickly. I'm Caleb. I'm trying not to make a sound right now that will be embarrassing for both of us. He almost smiled. I'm not saying it's anything. I'm saying it's the first time in 3 years I've wanted to be somewhere specific that wasn't already on my schedule. Rachel was quiet for a long moment. Does she know? She asked. Know what? That she did that. He looked out the window. The estate grounds were still the early light moving across them with the unhurried patience of a morning that didn't know it was important. I don't know what she knows, he said honestly. Caleb. Rachel's voice softened. Maya would want you to have this. I know. I know you know. I'm saying it anyway because I think you need to hear it out loud from a person, not just from the part of yourself that's been arguing with the other part of yourself for 3 years. A pause. She would want you to be there for whatever this is. She would want you to get on a different train. His throat tightened. He touched the bracelet without thinking. How's Lily's star egg? He asked. Honestly, it's perfect. I'm going to have her do it every morning. Don't tell her that, or she'll make it a requirement. It should be a requirement. It's a great egg. He laughed. Real unguarded, the same spontaneous thing that had surprised him the night before. Call tonight, he said. Call tonight. And Caleb. Yeah. Be there. Be all the way there. Don't run the exit scenarios while you're in the room. He exhaled. I'll try, he said. That's all anyone can do, she said. Now go. You've got a wedding to attend. He got dressed. The day organized itself. The way wedding days organize themselves. The whole household, moving with the particular contained energy of an event that has been planned for months and is now finally undeniably happening. Sophie was up early too, already at the kitchen table with a coffee and a notebook. When Caleb came downstairs going over what he assumed were maid of honor responsibilities with the focused competence she applied to everything. She looked up when he came in. Morning, she said. Morning. He poured a coffee from the pot. How long have you been up? Since 5. She made a face. I kept going over the toast in my head. I've written it 4 times. Is the 4th version good? The 4th version is 2 sentences. He sat down across from her. What are the 2 sentences? She looked at him for a moment, then down at the notebook. Elena. She read, You are the reason my brother laughs the way he used to laugh when he was 8 years old, and didn't know yet that the world could be difficult. I don't know how to thank someone for that, so instead, I'll just say, welcome to being his family, because you've been his home for a long time already. Caleb held his coffee cup and said nothing for a moment. That's the right version, he said. Sophie looked up. You don't need the other 3, he said. She looked at the notebook, then she closed it. I talked to George this morning, she said. He was in the kitchen when I came down. He made coffee. He asked me about a project I did last year, a hospital courtyard. I mentioned it at dinner, and he had specific questions. Good ones. The kind that means someone was actually listening. She turned the coffee cup in her hands. He apologized. For what? He didn't say exactly. He said, I should have asked my own questions sooner. That's all. She paused. I told him there was nothing to apologize for. He told me he thought there was, but he appreciated that I said that. Caleb nodded. Is Ryan? She started. I don't know, Caleb said. I haven't seen him. He texted me last night, she said. After the dinner. He said he wanted to clear the air before the ceremony. She put her phone face down on the table, a small deliberate gesture. I didn't respond. Good. It used to feel impossible not to respond. Like silence was its own kind of cruelty, and I had to manage that. She looked at the phone. Now it just feels like a boundary. That's what it is. Yeah. She was quiet for a moment. I know that. I'm just noticing that I know it differently now than I did yesterday morning. He understood what she meant. There was the knowing that lived in your head, the correct intellectual understanding of a thing. And then there was the knowing that moved into your body, into the specific physical experience of actually doing it and feeling the ground hold. She'd done it. The ground had held. The morning moved forward. The house filled with noise. The florist arrived, the photographer arrived. Elena's mother moved through every room with the authority of a woman running an operation. And Daniel appeared at one point in the hallway, holding his tie with the specific expression of a man who had forgotten how to tie a tie despite having tied it hundreds of times before. "Can you?" He held it out to Caleb. "Yeah." Caleb took the tie and began working it the way you work something your hands have done enough times that it bypasses thought entirely. "Breathe." "I'm breathing." "You're not." "I'm—" Daniel stopped. Breathed. "Okay. Maybe not fully. You're getting married in—" Caleb glanced at the clock in the hallway. 4 hours. Everything that needed to happen has happened. Everything from here is the good part. "What if I cry during the vows?" "You're going to cry during the vows." Daniel looked stricken. "That's the correct response," Caleb said. "It means you're present. It means you understand what you're doing." He finished the tie and stepped back. "Yusuf is going to cry too. I'd bet on it." "Yusuf never cries." "Yusuf cried at the dog food commercial last Christmas. Sophie told me." Daniel blinked. "She told you that?" Caleb said nothing. Daniel looked at him with those open, uncalculating eyes. "She talks to you," he said. Not a question. "We talked a lot on the train," Caleb said carefully. "No, I mean—" Daniel stopped. "Sophie doesn't talk. Not really. Not the way she was talking last night. Not the way she looks when she's talking to you." He paused. "She used to. Before Ryan. She'd fill a whole room with herself and it was never too much. And then she got smaller and smaller and—" He stopped, looked at the wall. "I should have said something. I keep thinking I should have—" "You're saying something now," Caleb said. "To her, with this weekend. By being glad she's here." Daniel looked at him. "That counts," Caleb said. "It all counts." Daniel nodded slowly. He straightened his tie, perfect now, clean and straight. "She deserves somebody real," he said quietly. Not specifically. Not quite directed at Caleb. More like something he was saying to the air, to the universe, to whoever was listening. Caleb didn't respond to that, but he heard it. The ceremony was at 4 o'clock. The garden had been transformed, the same pergola from the rehearsal now threaded with white and gold chairs, arranged in rows facing the simple altar. The evening light falling at the angle that made everything look like it was lit from inside. Someone had put flowers everywhere that belonged there, and nowhere they didn't, and the overall effect was of a place that had been made ready to hold something important. Caleb sat in the 3rd row on the groom's side. Ryan was in the 5th row on the bride's side. Caleb had noticed him arrive, and had noted the row with the automatic precision of a man who had spent years tracking positions in a room and had then deliberately stopped noting it. Ryan was not the event. Ryan was not the day. The day was Daniel in a charcoal suit at the end of the aisle, who had indeed begun crying approximately 30 seconds after Elena appeared at the other end of it. Elena was extraordinary. Not in a performative way. In the specific way of a woman who had simply stopped trying to be anything other than exactly what she was, which turned out to be exactly enough. She walked toward Daniel with the unhurried certainty of someone who had already made the decision and was now just completing the motion. And Sophie was beside her, in a soft gold dress that she hadn't worn at the dinner. Something she'd changed into something that fit the afternoon light in a way that made Caleb think about the word luminous, which was not a word he typically thought about. She walked at Elena's side, and she was present in the fullest sense of that word. Not watching the room, not tracking Ryan, not maintaining, just there, in this moment, in this garden. With her brother at the end of the aisle doing exactly what he was meant to be doing. When Sophie delivered the toast, there was no performance in it. 2 sentences. The room was very quiet afterward for 3 full seconds. And then Margaret Reyes made a sound that may or may not have been a sob, and began clapping, and everyone else followed, and Daniel leaned over and kissed his wife on the top of her head, and Elena laughed, and the whole room seemed to exhale into the best version of itself. Caleb watched Sophie sit back down. She didn't look for his reaction, but her eyes found him anyway, briefly across the room. The way eyes find something familiar in an unfamiliar place, and she gave a small quiet nod, like she was confirming something to herself. He nodded back. The reception followed in the same garden as the light shifted from gold to amber, to the first blue of evening, the white lights in the pergola beginning to earn their place as the natural light softened. Tables had been arranged. A small band had materialized. Dinner arrived with the kind of effortless abundance that suggested Margaret Reyes had been coordinating with the caterers since well before dawn. Caleb found himself at a table with George and Margaret Reyes, Daniel's college roommate Marcus, and two of Elena's cousins from Phoenix, who were immediately and uncomplicated delightful, and wanted to talk about everything except the thing everyone else was tiptoeing around. Ryan had been seated at the other end of the reception area. Not banished, nothing so obvious, just positioned in the natural geography of the event, at enough distance that the distance required no explanation. Caleb suspected George had something to do with that. He didn't ask. The band started playing at 7 a 4-piece, with the kind of instinctive read on a room that good musicians develop over years of playing events where they have to serve the mood rather than set it. They read this room correctly. They started with something slow and warm, the kind of song that invites rather than demands. Daniel and Elena had their first dance. Caleb watched from his seat. The thing that struck him was not how they moved. They were not elegant dancers. Daniel in particular seemed to be concentrating in a way that suggested he'd practiced and was now deploying the practice, but how they looked at each other while moving. With the specific, unguarded attentiveness of two people for whom the other person is still genuinely interesting. I thought about dancing with Maya at a friend's wedding 3 years before they got married. He'd been nervous about it, inexplicably, given everything he'd done. That didn't make him nervous. She'd taken his hand and said, "Just follow the music and stop thinking about your feet." And he'd said, "I'm not thinking about my feet," which was a complete lie. And she'd laughed and said, "I know." And somehow after that, his feet had been fine. He touched the bracelet. Then he put his hand flat on the table, palm down. It was a small decision. Barely a decision at all. The kind of thing that doesn't look like anything from the outside. But it meant something to him, the choosing to let his hand simply rest, without reaching for the past, for just this moment. The first dance ended. The floor opened. George and Margaret went out. Elena's cousins pulled reluctant partners from their seats. The band eased into something with a little more tempo. Ryan crossed the room. Caleb saw him moving before Sophie did. He was making his way from his end of the reception area with the deliberate, contained purpose of a man executing a plan he'd decided on, and his heading was clear. He was going to ask Sophie to dance, in front of everyone, in the most public, unimpeachable possible way. A polite, friendly gesture at a wedding. An olive branch, a demonstration of his narrative. See how reasonable I am. See how I've moved on. See the contrast between my graciousness and whatever it is she can't let go of. Caleb stood. He was across the room in the time it took Ryan to cover the first half of his route, not rushing, not aggressive, just moving with direction. He reached Sophie first. She'd seen Ryan coming. He could tell by the way she was sitting back straight, hands in her lap, the composed readiness of someone bracing for a thing they'd been trying not to brace for all day. "Sophie," Caleb said. She looked up at him. He extended his hand. Not asking, not explaining. Just offering the same way he'd held her hand on the train, steady and unhurried, like it was the most natural available thing. She looked at his hand. Then she took it. They were on the floor before Ryan reached her chair. Caleb heard the moment Ryan stopped. He didn't need to look. The band was playing something mid-tempo, and Caleb was honest enough with himself to acknowledge that he was not objectively an elegant dancer. The Navy had given him many skills, and dancing was not among them. But he knew how to move without apologizing for it, and he knew how to make a partner feel held rather than managed, and those two things turned out to be the essential components. "He was coming over," Sophie said quietly. "I know. You saw him before I did. Old habit. She looked at him. Did you always do this, watch rooms? In the Navy, situational awareness keeps people alive. He met her eyes. In civilian life, I'm told it's occasionally unnerving. It's not unnerving, she said. She paused. It's what it feels like when someone actually sees what's happening. They moved. The band found its rhythm. Around them, other couples danced with varying degrees of grace and investment. The older couples with the practiced ease of long habit, the younger ones with the self-consciousness that eventually, if you're lucky, burns away. How are you doing? He asked. Not performance of concern. Actual inquiry. Better than I thought, she said. Today has been... She shook her head slightly. It's been a good day, Caleb. A genuinely good day. I forgot what those felt like. You gave a good toast. You told me which version to use. You wrote it. I just said which one. That's not a small thing. No, he agreed. I suppose not. They were quiet for a moment, moving to the music. My dad would have liked today, she said. He would have had something to say about the flowers. He had strong opinions about peonies, that they were the most honest flower, because they bloom extravagantly and then fall apart completely, and there's no self-consciousness about either phase. She paused. I didn't understand what he meant until today. Caleb turned them slightly so he could see the arrangement on the nearest table, full white peonies at the height of their bloom petals, loosening at the edges. He was right, he said. She smiled. He usually was, she said. They danced. It was not one of those movie moment dances where everything else stops and the world contracts to two people. The band kept playing, other couples kept moving somewhere behind them. Someone knocked over a glass, and there was a brief burst of laughter. The evening was what it was, imperfect, real, full of the ordinary grace of people, celebrating something that mattered. But inside that ordinary grace, something was happening that Caleb couldn't have accurately named and didn't try to. Sophie's hand was in his. Her other hand was on his shoulder. She was looking past him with the relaxed, present quality of someone who has put down something heavy and is still surprised by the lightness. He was holding her the way he'd held her hand on the train, like an anchor, not a claim. He thought about what Rachel had said. Be all the way there. He was trying. More than trying. He was, for the first time in a very long time, succeeding. Can I tell you something? Sophie said. Yeah. When I sat down next to you on the train. She paused. After you took my hand. When I realized you were actually going to do it. Actually going to help. She looked at him now. I thought this is a kind stranger who's going to get off at his stop, and I'll be grateful for him for a long time and never see him again. And then you didn't get off at your stop. Something moved in her expression, careful but not guarded. And then you were at dinner, and you talked to George, and you stood outside on the steps with me. She looked at him steadily. And I'm standing here, and I don't know what this is, Caleb. I don't want to name it wrong. Then don't name it, he said. Is that okay? More than okay. I'm still... She stopped, started again. I'm not ready to trust fast. I thought I was good at people, and Ryan taught me that I wasn't, or at least that I had gaps I didn't know about. I'm still... Sophie. He stopped her gently. I'm not asking you to be anywhere you're not. She looked at him. I'm here right now, he said. That's all. I'm not building a future in my head that you have to live up to. I'm here tonight at your brother's wedding, dancing with you because this is where I want to be. He paused. Everything else is... noise, she said. The same word he'd used at the beginning of the day. Everything else is noise, he said. She exhaled. It was such a complete exhale, the long releasing kind, that he felt the shift in her physically, in the way her hand in his, settled, the way her posture found something easier. You're going to have to go back to Baltimore, she said. And I'm in D.C. 45 minutes, he said. She looked at him. I know the drive, he said. I do it for work sometimes. A pause. That's... She seemed to be doing math. That's a very specific thing to mention. I'm a specific person. The corner of her mouth moved. 45 minutes, she repeated.
40 in good traffic.
Good traffic on 95 is theoretical. I've done it in 42, he said. Once, early Sunday. No rain. She was smiling now, not careful, not controlled. The real one. The one that changed everything in her face. The song ended. They stopped moving. Around them, the reception rearranged itself. People returning to tables. The band taking a moment. The room settling into the soft, unhurried quality of an evening that knew it had already accomplished its main purpose and was now simply enjoying the aftermath. Ryan was standing near the bar. Caleb noticed. He couldn't entirely stop noticing. But something was different about Ryan's posture, a very slight change in the way he was holding himself. Less composed than he'd been at dinner. Less organized. The way a performance looks when the performer has been maintaining it for longer than planned and the upkeep is starting to cost something. George Reyes was not talking to him. That Caleb suspected was the difference. Whatever conversation George had had with his wife after the restaurant, and Caleb had no direct knowledge of that conversation. Only the evidence of George's behavior throughout the day, the way he'd moved through the reception, who he'd sought out, and who he'd gently pointedly not sought out. Something had shifted in the architecture of Ryan's footing in this room. Not destroyed, not exposed, just shifted. The ground he'd been standing on with such confidence had become slightly less solid in the quiet, invisible way that ground changes when water moves beneath it. Sophie saw the direction of Caleb's gaze. She looked at Ryan. Then she looked away. "Is it terrible," she said quietly, "that I don't feel sorry for him?" "No," Caleb said. "I keep waiting to feel sorry for him, because he looked—" She stopped. "He looks like someone whose plan is going wrong, and there's a part of me that remembers when I used to try to fix his plans going wrong. When his discomfort was something I felt responsible for." She paused. "And now I just—" She tilted her head slightly. "I feel sorry that he is who he is, but not sorry that it's catching up with him." "Those are different things," Caleb said. "Are they?" "It feels like a line." "There's a line between compassion and complicity," he said. "You're on the right side of it." She considered that. "Did the Navy teach you that too?" she asked. "That one came from somewhere else," he said. She didn't ask where. She probably knew. Daniel found them 20 minutes later. His tie loosened, his eyes bright, his new wife's hand in his. He looked at Caleb with the uncomplicated directness that had been his natural register all weekend. "Are you coming back?" Daniel asked. "After this weekend, are you?" He gestured between Caleb and Sophie. "Daniel," Sophie said. "I'm just asking." "You're being extremely obvious. I'm being optimistic. There's a difference." He looked at Caleb. "She's been alone for 8 months, and before that she wasn't actually with someone, she was disappearing." His voice didn't change pitch, still conversational, still warm, but the weight in it increased. "I just want to know if she's going to have someone real in her corner." "Daniel," Sophie started. "I'm in her corner," Caleb said. Simple, direct, the way he said things when he meant them all the way down. Daniel held his gaze for a moment. Then he nodded. Once. The nod of a man satisfied by the honesty of an answer, even if the answer itself was incomplete. "Good," he said. He squeezed Sophie's shoulder once and turned back to Elena. Sophie watched him go. "I'm sorry," she said. He loves you," Caleb said. "Don't apologize for that." She closed her mouth. The evening moved forward. The band played. People danced and ate and laughed and told the stories that weddings make people want to tell, the ones about their own love, their own history, the versions of themselves that existed before and after the person who changed things. Caleb sat and listened and talked, and found himself in the specific, unfamiliar state of a man enjoying an evening without monitoring his enjoyment for signs of inappropriateness. He was just there, all the way there. At 9:30, Ryan left. Caleb tracked the exit without looking like he was tracking it, the quiet collection of a jacket, the handshake with Tom, the brief attempt to find George that resulted in George being engaged in conversation with his wife and not disengaging. The walk to the door was unhurried, controlled, maintaining the performance to the last possible moment. He didn't approach Sophie. He didn't approach Caleb. He left. The room felt very slightly lighter afterward. Not dramatically. Not in a way that anyone would have announced, but the specific low-grade tension that had occupied a corner of the evening released, and the party, freed from even its unconscious awareness of that tension, relaxed another degree. Sophie sat down next to Caleb. "He's gone," she said. "Yeah. I didn't think he'd leave without—" She stopped. "Without what?" "Without a last word. Some final thing that he'd frame as closure, but would actually be a final attempt at the narrative," Caleb said. "Yes. Maybe he's learning," Caleb said. "Or maybe he just—" He paused. "Maybe he looked around the room and decided it wasn't worth it tonight. Because of you." He shook his head. "Because of George. Because of Elena. Because of the fact that this room has spent a whole day with you in it, and the story doesn't match." He looked at her. The evidence was against him. He's smart enough to know when to stop. She was quiet. "It doesn't feel like victory," she said. "What does it feel like?" "Like nothing almost. Like waiting for thunder after lightning, and the thunder just doesn't come." "That's what it is," he said. "Most things that we dread aren't thunder. They're just lightning. They look catastrophic from a distance, and then they pass." She turned to look at him. "That's a good line," she said. "I've had a lot of quiet evenings to think. You should write some of them down." "Lily says I should write a book. She wants me to write a book about an octopus who is also a firefighter." Sophie laughed, the loud one, the unguarded one, the one she'd been careful with at the beginning of the train ride and had stopped being careful with somewhere around hour 2. "That's a very specific pitch," she said. "She has detailed ideas. The octopus is named Gerald. Gerald is a perfect name for an octopus firefighter. He has 8 arms, so he can carry 8 hoses. That's actually good firefighting logic." "She's 7, Caleb said. "She's already a better strategist than most of my former colleagues." Sophie smiled, warm and wide and completely unmanaged. He watched her smile. He thought about the train, about her cold hand, about the way she'd laughed at the coffee story like something that had been locked up had found a crack to get through. He thought about the version of himself that had boarded that train, headphones in invisible planning, 3 hours of nothing. I thought about the version of himself sitting here now. Same person, different direction. Can I ask you something?" he said. "After this weekend, you've definitely earned it." "The bracelet," he said. She looked at the silver band on his wrist. "You've looked at it a few times, when I've touched it." "I noticed you touch it," she said carefully. "When you're thinking about something hard." He looked at it. "I haven't touched it in a few hours," he said. "A beat." "I noticed that too," she said softly. He held the bracelet in his fingers, not with grief, not with the reaching quality it had always had before. With something that was closer to gratitude. The simple, full gratitude of someone holding a piece of the past, and knowing it's a piece of the past. Not a weight, not a debt, not an unfinished argument. A piece of what made him who he was. "She would have liked you," he said. Sophie went very still. "Maya," he said. She was the kind of person who liked people who were honest about the things that scared them. He paused. "You're that. Even when you're trying to hide it." Sophie looked at him for a long moment. "I'd have liked her too," she said quietly. "Anyone who chose you." She stopped. Started again. "Anyone who spent 8 years with you and made you into someone who holds a stranger's hand on a train. Because she looked scared, I'd have liked her a great deal." He didn't speak for a moment. Because the thing that was happening in his chest was real, and he didn't want to put words around it until he knew what shape the words needed to be. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For not being afraid of her," he said. "A lot of people, when I mention Maya, they go careful. Like she's a subject that requires protective equipment." He paused. "You don't. You never have." "She's part of who you are," Sophie said simply. "Why would I be afraid of that?" He looked at her. She looked back. The band was playing something slow and gentle now, the late-night music that replaced the dinner energy, the sound a reception makes when it's winding down into the kind of evening that belongs to the people still there. "Dance with me again," she said. He stood, extended his hand. She took it. They moved back to the floor, less populated. Now the remaining guests drifting in the easy, unstructured way of the end of a long good day. Daniel and Elena were on the floor too. Elena with her shoes off. Daniel with his jacket somewhere. Both of them moving the way people move when they've stopped performing and are just being. Sophie rested her head briefly against Caleb's shoulder. Not a romantic gesture, or not only that, the gesture of someone who was tired and had found a trustworthy place to be tired in. He let her. He thought about tomorrow. He thought about Baltimore and D.C. and 45 minutes on a Sunday in decent traffic. He thought about Lily's face when he got home, the way she ran at him from wherever she was in the house with absolutely no regard for whether he was carrying something or needed a moment, just full speed toward him, because that was how she loved people, and she hadn't learned yet to modulate it. He was going to have to tell Lily something. He didn't know what yet. Maybe nothing for now. Maybe just that he'd had a good trip, that he'd met good people. Maybe much later, something else entirely. Sophie lifted her head. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "About Lily," he said honestly. Something in her expression shifted open, warm, and careful all at once. "What about her? About how she loves people," he said. "All the way, like she hasn't learned to hold anything back." He paused. "I've been trying not to teach her that the world requires that. But I also—" He stopped. "I learned it. At some point I learned it. And I've been trying to find the way back." Sophie looked at him steadily. "I think," she said quietly, "you've been finding it." He met her eyes. "I thought this is the most honest I've been in 3 years. This is what it feels like to be a full person talking to another full person. Neither of them managing the other, neither of them hiding the essential things. He thought I got on a train this morning with nowhere specific to be, and nowhere is precisely where I ended up. He thought Maya. He thought I know." The music played, the evening held, and Caleb Harrison, who had spent 3 years learning to live in the narrow channel between grief and function, found himself standing in the middle of a wedding dance floor in Virginia, with a woman whose laugh he now knew 3 versions of feeling the slow, terrifying, absolutely necessary expansion of a life that had decided without asking him to get larger. He didn't stop it. For the first time, he didn't stop it. The morning after the wedding was quiet, in the way that only mornings after large events can be quiet, a specific full silence that feels earned rather than empty, the world catching its breath after something that mattered. Caleb was up first again. He sat on the edge of the duck quilt bed and looked at the bracelet on his wrist for a long time. Just looked at it. Not reaching for it, not gripping it, not using it as the handhold he'd been using it as for 3 years. Just looking at it the way you look at something you love, that you've finally stopped being afraid of losing. He thought about what Sophie had said on the dance floor. "I think you've been finding it." He thought about the train. About the 48 hours between that moment and this one. About how much a life could shift in 48 hours when you stopped actively resisting the shift. He got up, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table in the early morning silence. Sophie came downstairs 20 minutes later, still in her pajamas. Hair loose, carrying her phone and looking like someone who had slept deeply for the first time in a long time and was still slightly surprised by it. She stopped when she saw him at the table. "You made coffee," she said. "There's enough for 2. She poured a cup and sat across from him. They didn't say anything for a few minutes. Just sat with their coffee in the morning, quiet the way people sit when they're comfortable enough with each other that silence doesn't require filling. "I've been thinking," she said finally, about what happens today." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "You go back to Baltimore, I go back to D.C., and—" She stopped. "And," he said. "And I don't know what the protocol is," she said. "For 2 people who became friends on a train and then spent a weekend at a wedding together and—" She looked at him. "I don't know what we are." "Does it need a name?" he asked. "No," she said. "But I need to know if I'm going to hear from you." She said it plainly without apology. The direct honesty that he'd come to understand was her truest register. "Because I'm not doing the thing where we have this—" She gestured between them. And then we go back to our separate lives, and it slowly becomes a really good memory. I've had enough things become memories lately. He looked at her across the table. You're going to hear from me, he said. How often? Often enough that you know I mean it. He held her gaze. Not so often it's pressure. She considered that. That's a good answer, she said. I've been thinking about the answer since last night. I know, she said. I could tell. A small smile. You get a specific look when you're working something out. Your jaw does a thing. My jaw doesn't do a thing. It absolutely does a thing. Daniel noticed it too. He mentioned it this morning before you were up. He said you looked like a man solving an equation. I wasn't solving an equation. What were you doing? Figuring out how to say a true thing without making it too large, he said. She was quiet. The true thing being, she said, that this weekend mattered, he said, that you matter, not as, he stopped, started more carefully. I spent 3 years making my world very small because small felt safe, manageable. Lily, Rachel, work, home, repeat. And somewhere in that smallness I stopped. He looked at his coffee. I stopped being a person who wanted things. For himself. Just for himself, not for Lily, not for the job, not because someone needed something from me. He looked up at her. And then you sat down next to me and asked me to be your husband for 3 hours, and by the end of the first hour, I was remembering what it felt like to want. Sophie held very still. That's the true thing, he said. And I didn't want to make it too large because you said you need time and you do, and I respect that completely. But I also... He paused. I couldn't let you go back to DC today thinking you were just a really good memory. Sophie looked at him for a long time. Then she reached across the table. She put her hand over his. Not holding his hand, just covering it. The same gesture he'd made on the train, the same anchor quality, but reversed. You're not a memory either, she said. He turned his hand over and held hers. Neither of them said anything else for a while. They didn't need to. Daniel and Elena came downstairs an hour later. Elena still in the specific radiant days of someone who had gotten married the day before and hadn't entirely processed it yet. Daniel with the look of a man who had everything he wanted and was intermittently stunned by this fact. The four of them had breakfast together, eggs, which Sophie made while Daniel told the story of the star egg that Lily apparently specialized in, which he'd heard from Caleb the night before, and retold with enthusiastic embellishment. She's 7, Elena said. 7, Caleb confirmed. She sounds incredible. She's going to run something someday, Caleb said. I just don't know what yet. Tell her I'd work for her, Elena said. She'll hold you to that. He paused. She has a very good memory. Elena looked at Sophie across the table with an expression that contained a full conversation, the kind that exists between women who understand each other without words, that says, I see what I'm seeing, and I'm glad for it. Sophie looked back. Something small and private passed between them. Caleb pretended not to notice. He wasn't entirely successful. They packed afterward. The house that had been full of organized chaos since Friday settled back into the quiet of a rented space between its events, patiently waiting for the next occasion. Someone needed it to hold. Caleb carried the bags downstairs. Old habit. Nobody stopped him. In the driveway. Daniel shook Caleb's hand. Not the brief, firm shake of two strangers, but the longer, heavier version of two people who had taken a genuine measure of each other and found the result satisfactory. Come back, Daniel said. Simply, not as a social nicety, as an actual request. I will, Caleb said. Elena hugged him, which surprised him slightly. She pulled back and held his gaze with those clear, direct eyes. Thank you, she said, for being here. Thank you for having me. You made it a better weekend, she said. I mean for everyone, not just Sophie. She glanced at Sophie, who was saying goodbye to Margaret and George on the porch. Although especially for Sophie. Caleb watched Sophie hug Margaret, who held on with the fullness of a woman who had made her mind up about someone and was expressing it physically. George shook Sophie's hand and then changed his mind and hugged her instead. Sophie's face over George's shoulder was the face of someone receiving something they'd been told they didn't deserve for long enough that receiving it had become surprising. Caleb thought she is going to be fine. Not because of him. Not because of this weekend. She was going to be fine because she was Sophie Bennett, who had walked into a train car, terrified, and sat down next to a stranger, and demanded quietly, and without apology, the basic dignity of not being alone. That was courage. All the rest of it, the 8 months of surviving Ryan's narrative. The arriving at her brother's wedding anyway. The standing in front of a room and delivering 2 true sentences. That was who she had always been underneath everything that had tried to make her smaller. She came down the porch steps. She and Caleb stood together in the driveway while Daniel and Elena waved from the porch, and the Reyes family moved back inside. "George told me to call him next week," Sophie said, "about the garden project." "You should." "I know." She looked at Caleb. "Ryan texted me this morning." He waited. "He said he was sorry for the way things ended. He said he hoped I was happy." She paused. "It was the most generous thing he's ever said to me, which tells you something about the last 2 years." "Are you going to respond?" "I already did." She looked at her phone, then back at him. "I said thank you. Take care of yourself." A pause. "And then I blocked the number." Caleb looked at her. "Was that wrong?" she said. "No," he said. "That was exactly right." She nodded. Put her phone in her bag. "I have a 3-hour drive back to D.C., she said. "I know." "You have to Baltimore," he said. "About an hour and a half." They stood there. "This is the part," she said, "where in the movies the person says something that fixes everything and there's music." "I don't have music," he said. "No, I have." He thought about it. "I have Lily asking me about octopuses the moment I walk in the door. And Rachel making coffee she'll say, is better than mine, which it isn't. And a lunch to pack tomorrow morning. And the day after that." He paused. "And somewhere in all of that, a drive down 95 on a Sunday." Sophie looked at him. "That's the something that fixes everything," she said. "It's not fixing," he said. "It's just what comes next." She held his gaze. 45 minutes, she said quietly. 40 in good traffic. Theoretically. "I'll leave early," he said. She smiled, the real one, the full one, the one that had been locked up for 8 months and was finding its way back into the world. She stepped forward. She hugged him. He held her properly, fully, the way you hold someone when the gesture means something real and both people in it know it. "Thank you," she said into his shoulder, "for getting on a different train. Thank you for sitting down," he said. She pulled back. She looked at him one more time, the careful measuring look that had been her first look at him on the train, the one that was trying to determine if he was safe. It looked different now. Not because she'd stopped asking the question, because she'd had 48 hours of evidence, and the evidence had come back clear. She got in her car. He stood in the driveway and watched her go. Then he picked up his duffel, got in his car, and drove home to Baltimore. The weeks that followed. The way weeks move when something has changed in the underlying structure of a life. The surface events remain ordinary, predictable, scheduled, while underneath them, something is quietly rearranging itself into a new configuration. He texted her on Monday. A photograph of the lunch he'd packed for Lily's standard construction, peanut butter sandwich, apple slices. A small note that said, "Have a great day." Lil, because he'd been thinking about Sophie's story about the chair in her grandmother's kitchen, about the comfort of small proof, and he wanted her to have something small and ordinary. She sent back a photograph of her drafting table with 3 different blueprints overlapping and a coffee that had clearly gone cold. Under it, she wrote the project George Reyes mentioned. "I called. We have a meeting Thursday." He wrote back, "The evidence is against people like Ryan. Always. Eventually." She wrote, "You told me that on the train." He wrote, "It was true then too." She sent back a single laughing emoji and then a longer message. "How's Lily?" And so it went. Not dramatic. Not rushed. The specific daily texture of 2 people choosing each other incrementally in the small exchanges that add up over time to something that can hold weight. He drove down on the third Sunday. He had told Lily the weekend before carefully at the kitchen table, with the directness he tried to always use with her because she was 7 and capable of understanding more than most adults gave her credit for. "There's someone I'd like you to meet," he said. "A friend. Her name is Sophie." Lily had looked at him with Maya's eyes, that particular brown, that particular steadiness. "Is she nice?" Lily asked. "Very," he said. "Does she like octopuses?" He thought about the fictional firefighter named Gerald. "I think she'd be very open to them," he said. Lily considered this with the seriousness the question deserved. "Okay," she said. "Just okay," he said. "Daddy." She gave him the look, the one that said she was 7, but not naive. "I'll decide after I meet her." He had laughed at that loud, unguarded, the kind of laugh that came from somewhere it had been stored. "Fair enough," he said. He brought Lily to D.C. on a Sunday in late October. Sophie had suggested a park, a place she knew, a quiet one with good trees and a path along a small creek. Neutral ground, no pressure space for a 7-year-old to be a 7-year-old without the confines of a restaurant or the weight of a formal introduction. He watched Lily and Sophie meet. Lily approached with the full-speed directness of a child who had not yet learned to hedge and said, "Are you Sophie?" "I am," Sophie said, crouching down to eye level. "Are you Lily?" "Yes. My dad said you'd be open to octopuses." Sophie looked at Caleb over Lily's head with an expression of complete delight that she made no attempt to conceal. "I'm very open to octopuses," she said to Lily. "Tell me everything." What followed was a 20-minute walk along the creek path, during which Lily explained the complete conceptual framework of Gerald the octopus firefighter, his 8 hoses, his water resistance, his specific challenges with breathing equipment, and the subplot involving a rival firefighting crab, while Sophie listened with the complete and genuine attention of someone who was not performing interest but actually had it. Caleb walked behind them. He watched his daughter's hands moving as she talked. He watched Sophie's face. He thought about what Rachel had said to him on the phone the morning of the wedding. Be all the way there. He thought about how long it had taken him to learn that. How much of the last 3 years had been spent in the correct location doing the correct things while being somewhere else entirely inside himself. He thought, I am all the way here. For the first time. All the way. After the park, they got hot chocolate at a small cafe that Sophie knew, the old diner kind with laminate counters and ceramic cups that probably hadn't been updated since the 90s, exactly the kind of place she'd described on the train. Lily approved immediately. "This place is good," she announced. "I thought you'd like it," Sophie said. "It has the right smell." Lily looked at her seriously. "Old places smell right." "I completely agree," Sophie said. Lily looked at her with those Maya eyes. "You can come to the park again," she said. Which was from Lily, not a casual statement. It was an assessment rendered and a verdict delivered. Caleb held his ceramic cup and felt something complete itself, something that had been moving toward completion for months, working quietly beneath the surface of the daily ordinary, and had finally arrived. Sophie caught his eye over Lily's head. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The months moved forward. The George Reyes Garden project became a contract, and then a successful project, and then a referral to 3 other clients in the Charlottesville area. Sophie's firm grew by 2 people over the winter. She drove up to Baltimore on a Friday in December and met Rachel, who assessed her in about 90 seconds, and then spent the rest of the evening talking to her like a person she'd known for years, which was Rachel's highest possible form of endorsement. Ryan Whitmore's name came up less and less. Not because it was avoided, it simply became less relevant, the way a story becomes less relevant when you're too busy living a better one to retell the old one. Daniel called Caleb in January, ostensibly to ask about a soccer drill he'd seen somewhere, actually to check in. "How's Sophie?" he said toward the end of the call. "Good," Caleb said. "Really good." "And you?" Caleb considered the question. 3 years ago asked, "How are you?" He would have said fine, automatically, completely, without even passing through the space where a true answer might have lived. "Good," he said. "Really good." A pause. "Yeah," Daniel said. Yeah, Caleb said. He heard Daniel smile through the phone. On a Sunday in March, Caleb and Sophie were sitting on her apartment floor in D.C., surrounded by the specific chaos of a home reorganization project that had seemed manageable when they started it and had since revealed itself to be an excavation. Boxes of things she'd packed away after Ryan. Items she'd kept out of obligation and was now deliberately deciding what to do with. The specific work of making a space fully your own again. Lily was at Rachel's. They'd been at it for 3 hours. Sophie held up a photograph her and Ryan, somewhere that looked like a charity event, both of them smiling with the careful smile of a posed photo. She looked at it for a moment. Then she put it in the box marked, "Donate not with anger, not with ceremony," just with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone making a clear-eyed decision about the past. "Okay," Caleb said. "More than okay," she said. And then quieter. "I don't need it to mean anything complicated. It just doesn't belong here anymore." He nodded. They kept working. An hour later, Sophie found something at the bottom of a box, a small landscape drawing she'd done years ago before Ryan, before the firm, when she was just starting out and drawing everything to see what she liked. A garden design rough and unfinished, a concept she'd never built. She sat with it for a long time. "What's that?" he asked. "Something I forgot I wanted to make." She turned it in her hands. "I drew this in the first year I was on my own. I had this idea for a memorial garden, not the traditional kind, not with plaques and formality, but something living. Where the plants changed with the seasons. Where you could go in winter when everything was bare, and in spring when everything came back, and it meant something different each time." She paused. "Ryan said it was too niche, too specific, that nobody would pay for something that personal." Caleb looked at the drawing. "Make it," he said. She looked at him. "Not for a client yet," he said. "Just make it. Because you designed it and it's good, and you forgot to want it for long enough and now you remember." He held her gaze. "Make the thing you forgot to want." She looked at the drawing. "Yeah," she said quietly. "Yeah, okay." She put it on the stack of things to keep. The conversation that changed everything happened on a Tuesday evening in April. Not a dramatic evening. No occasion, no setup, no specific circumstance that would have flagged it in advance as the evening when something important was going to be said. Just an ordinary Tuesday in Sophie's apartment after dinner, sitting on the couch with the television on, but neither of them watching it. Caleb had been quieter than usual. Sophie had noticed. She always noticed. She'd learned the specific geography of his silences over the months. The difference between the comfortable quiet and the working, something out quiet, and she'd let him be in it without filling it, because that was one of the things she understood about him. Eventually she said, "What's the equation tonight?" He looked at her. "The thing Daniel said," she explained. "At the wedding. That you look like a man solving an equation when you're thinking hard." He almost smiled. Then, "I've been thinking about asking you something." "Ask it," she said. "I want to tell you something first." "Okay." He turned to face her on the couch. The full facing the deliberate thing. He did this when he meant what he was about to say in every layer of himself she'd learned. "When Maya died," he said, "I made a kind of deal with myself. I didn't articulate it. I didn't even know I was making it. But the deal was I would give everything to Lily. Everything I had. And in exchange, I wouldn't ask anything from life for myself. Not love, not—" He stopped. "Not tomorrow. Not the kind of tomorrow where something was possible that wasn't already in the plan." She listened. "I thought that was the right thing," he said. "I thought it was how you honored someone. By not replacing what they were. By not—" He exhaled. "By not moving." "Caleb, I know," he said. "I know it was wrong. Not wrong to love Maya. Not wrong to grieve. But wrong to think that stopping was the same as honoring." He looked at his hands, at the bracelet. "Maya didn't want me stopped. She wanted me to be the person she loved. And the person she loved ran toward things. The person she loved didn't know how to walk past something that needed fixing." He looked up at Sophie. "You told me on the train I was one of those people, the kind who runs toward things." "You are," she said. "I stopped being that," he said. "After she died. I ran toward everything for everyone else and stopped cold at the edge of my own life. He held her gaze. Until a woman sat down next to me on a train and grabbed my hand and I couldn't walk past it. Sophie was very still. You didn't just need rescuing, he said. I did too. I just didn't know it until you were sitting there. Her eyes were bright. I know I come with... He gestured vaguely. History. A daughter. A job that keeps unscheduled hours. A bracelet that I'm going to wear for the rest of my life because it's Maya's and it's mine, and that's not going to change. I know that, she said. And I know you need time, he said. I know you're still Caleb. She stopped him. He waited. I've had time, she said. 8 months before I met you, and 8 months with you in them. I know the difference. She looked at him steadily. Ask me the thing you've been working out since Tuesday. He looked at her. For a moment, just a moment, he felt it. The old reflex. The one that said, stay small, stay safe. Don't want things that can be taken. He let it pass. Will you? He stopped. Reorganized. I want to build something, he said. With you. Not fast, not a performance of something, just deliberately, intentionally. With Lily in it, and your work in it, and Sunday drives and bad traffic on 95 and everything that's actual. He held her eyes. I want to stop moving and start going somewhere. Sophie looked at him. Her eyes were full, not spilled, just full, the brightness of someone receiving something that arrived after a long wait. You're asking me, she said slowly, to be the direction. Yes, he said. The word was small and total. She reached out. She touched the bracelet on his wrist gently, the way you touch something you respect. Then she looked up at him. Yes, she said. They didn't mark the moment with anything grand. There was no music, no rain on the window, no cinematic gesture. There was just the two of them on a couch on a Tuesday in April, looking at each other with the full and undefended clarity of people who had decided to stop protecting themselves from the best available thing. He took her hand. She held on. On a Saturday, in October, 1 year and 2 weeks after a train pulled out of a Baltimore station, Caleb Harrison stood in a small garden in Annapolis, Maryland, with his daughter Lily on one side and his sister Rachel on the other, watching Sophie Bennett walk toward him. Not to an aisle, not to an altar with 100 guests watching. To him. The garden was one. Sophie had designed herself the living memorial garden from the old drawing she'd found at the bottom of the box. She'd built it over the summer native plantings that changed with the season, a path that curved through them, a central space that was open to the sky. She'd told him when she finished it that she'd been designing it for 8 years without knowing it. 20 people were with them. Daniel and Elena, Rachel and her husband, George and Margaret Reyes, Lily's teacher who had become a friend, Marcus who had cried at the rehearsal dinner and would absolutely cry again today. A handful of others who had been close enough to the full story to know what the day meant. Lily in a yellow dress she had selected herself with the authority of someone who did not compromise on color stood beside her father and watched Sophie coming and said in a loud whisper that was technically a whisper only in the most generous interpretation. She looks really good, Daddy. Caleb heard Sophie laugh from 15 feet away. He felt it in his chest like light. She reached him. She was wearing something simple and cream-colored, and she was not performing anything, not grace, not joy, not the managed public version of a woman on an important day. She was just Sophie fully herself, arriving exactly where she meant to arrive. She looked at him. He looked at her. Hi, she said. Hi, he said. 45 minutes, she said quietly. Only for him. 40 today, he said. No traffic. She smiled. The officiant began. Caleb held Sophie's hands, the silver bracelet on his left wrist, catching the October light, and he thought about the man he'd been a year ago. Headphones in invisible planning, 3 hours of nothing. He thought about Lily asking if Sophie was nice, and then deciding she'd reserve judgment until she had evidence. He thought about Maya's lipstick on a coffee mug he'd finally gently washed that spring, not as an ending, but as a homecoming. He thought about the specific quality of Sophie's laugh, which he now knew 4 versions of, and planned to spend a long time discovering the rest. I thought about a woman sitting down beside him on a train, and the enormous, terrifying, completely ordinary courage of asking a stranger for help. He thought that was the beginning. The vows were spoken. Lily cried, which she had declared in advance she absolutely would not do, and then wept freely the moment Sophie said the word family, and showed no embarrassment about it whatsoever, which was exactly right. Rachel held it together until the rings, and then didn't, which was also exactly right. Marcus cried from the first sentence. He'd seen it coming. George Reyes stood in the back with his arm around his wife, and the look of a man who had done one small thing. Offered an apology. Asked about someone's work. Reconsidered a story he'd been told, and watched it ripple forward into something larger than the gesture deserved. And in the center of it all, in the garden that Sophie had built from an old drawing and a recovered dream, two people who had been taken apart by different losses and had spent years learning to live in the remains, they chose each other. Not as replacements for what was gone. Not as answers to the questions that grief leaves open. As the next true thing. The rings were exchanged. The officiant said the words that make a thing official. And Caleb Harrison, who had once sat on a train in the specific darkness of a man who has forgotten how to want tomorrow, kissed his wife in a garden in Annapolis, while his daughter cheered with her whole body, and the October light came through the trees exactly the way good light comes, without asking permission, without announcing itself, simply present and warm and illuminating everything it touched. He had boarded one train. He had gotten off at a different stop, and everything that mattered in his life had been built from that single unplanned decision to hold a stranger's hand and say, "I'm here. You're not alone." He wasn't alone either. He hadn't been from the moment she sat down. He just needed someone brave